Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Zubin, and I have Pierce Salguero here with me. Hi, Pierce.
Hey, how you doing? Good to be back.
Welcome back. Yeah, man. So the last conversation we had, I'm not going to rehash it all, but I'm going to point people in the show description to our previous discussion called Unraveling the Threads of Awakening. And Pierce has a map that I think is much more satisfying for many people in terms of validating their lived experience in terms of their awakening phenomena. And the response to that episode has been tremendous. And we thought, let's come back and just do a deep dive into each of the main four threads that we talked about last time: emptiness, unity, love, energy, and the psyche or the unconscious. And we'll maybe touch into the life thread and something that you've called sort of spiritual crisis, which is how do you differentiate some of these phenomena that can happen in awakening from like a psychiatric issue that would land you in a 72-hour hold or worse, right? So we're going to dive into it. And I think people who are listening might, in the comments, leave their own experience. Like, what was the phenomenology? And what does that word mean, Pierce, phenomenology? Can you define it?
Yeah. I thought phenomenology would be a good focus for this session, since last time we did a lot of theory. Last session, it was kind of like laying out the map, and here's, the whole sort of territory and how I think about it as these four different threads that kind of can be thought of separately, and then they start to unify, blend together, and then are eventually released. So that whole model is kind of explained in the first conversation. But then, you and I were talking afterwards what would be most interesting to do, with the second conversation, and we were hearing that people wanted to do like a deep dive into these threads, and maybe not so much into the theoretical side of it, but actually the lived experience, the what is it like experientially. And so phenomenology, it's a big fancy academic word, and there's a whole sort of like field of philosophy that does phenomenology and so on and so forth. But when I'm saying that, I just mean like what is it like experientially, as opposed to the ontology, which is what is reality ultimately, which I think that's a really important distinction that I make in all of my work, is I'm not really interested in ontology. I'm not really interested in what is the ultimate truth about the universe. Is everything ultimately consciousness? Is everything ultimately material? Is it, quantum this, that, or the other? Is it God? Is it, those kinds of ultimate questions I think are, I feel like they might be entertaining sometimes to talk about, but they're not really what I'm most interested in. So I'm interested in phenomenology, which is, what do things seem like? What does it seem like? What is the experience like? How are things? How do things unfold within your other people's lived experience of spirituality, awakening, spiritual experiences? So that's kind of where my research is. It's also where my engagement with this whole threads model is primarily. You can think of it as a phenomenological map. It's a map of how things seem, how things appear.
Yeah, experiential reality, which is that's beautiful, because for me, for a long time, I was interested in ontology. What is the nature of reality? What is the truth? And the more the more these threads unfold experientially for me, the more that question drops away itself, because you're sitting in, for me experientially, you're sitting in the unknown in every moment. And so trying to know the unknown with the mind, it feels like like you said, it can be entertaining. We're almost constructing it and letting it go, constructing it and oh, it's all consciousness. Oh, it's all material. Oh, it's all quantum flux, whatever. But what's actually where the rubber meets the road is what's the experience in every moment, and how can we understand that? So a couple things I want to say too, to kind of wrap up from last week and point people in a direction. If they don't want to listen to that whole show, they can go to multidharma.net, and I'll put that link in, where they can read about your model, and you can read about it for free on the website, or you can pay and download the PDF. But if you're beginning in this sort of whole journey, and you haven't even really done any practices, or you're confused by the whole thing, you have a book called A Lamp Unto Yourself, which is fantastic. And that I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So you can get started in that, different practices that can open some of these experiential threads for you. And then you start having the experiences and go, oh, okay, now I can come back and really dive into, okay, where does that fit, and what might be next? And even that is the unknown, right? So it's just kind of a fun unfolding.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, Zubin. I'm kind of bad at promoting stuff, so I appreciate the reminder to do that. Yeah. So the Lamp Unto Yourself, which you read an early copy of, and there's a little blurb from ZDogg MD endorsing the book on the back. So thanks for that. That book is meant to be sort of like an entry, an on ramp to spirituality, entry level kind of overview of spirituality from this kind of zoomed out threads perspective, without getting wedded into a particular ontology, right? Without being wedded with a particular traditional worldview or dogma. How to sort of see the whole landscape of spirituality as a menu of different items that you can choose from and mix together in ways that make sense according to this threads model that will give you the most kind of diverse range of different kinds of practices, different styles of practices, to see what opens up for you. So that's what that book's about. And then Multidharma is for more in-depth kind of exploration, people who kind of have had a taste of at least one of the threads and want to know more about what they experience, what's coming next, or what other threads might be out there.
Perfect. And I think the theme of all that, then, to tie that into one sort of thread, is spaciousness, inclusivity, flexibility. Those are the kind of philosophies or container we're talking about with this model. So all these practices some might be useful at different times as different threads unfold and show up for you. It might be that you really focus into one, maybe Zen or yoga or Christian mysticism or whatever it is might be the most powerful thing for you, as maybe one thread might be most predominant at any given time. So it allows for this broadness, whereas oftentimes we, in the spiritual world, which, by the way, I think you and I agree, spirituality stops existing at some point as a thing. It's like it just poof, what was that? It was a raft that got us from here to here, and then the raft goes away. But we'll still speak in this way about spirituality, that sort of realm of experience. So much of it is, here's my approach, here's my way. And if you have a phenomenal experience outside of that, it's a side effect or a nothing burger that you should really get back to the main focus at hand. And I think that really can be difficult for a lot of people when that thing is pulling you. That's what you're experiencing. And anything else, now you're trying to conceptualize your way back into a model that is not experientially true for you.
Yeah. I mean, the basic premise of the model is that, traditionally people lived in monocultures where there was a limited number of sort of options for spiritual exploration. There was a limited number of, traditions. Some places had more than others, but you were largely limited to what was available within your own community. And so the basic premise is that spirituality, spiritual experiences, these kind of unusual phenomena, are actually naturally occurring possibilities within the human mind, the human brain, that we, all around the world, many different people have tapped into different kinds of experiences. Traditions coalesce around those, and they value certain kinds of traditions over others. They may not know about others. They may denigrate some. They may value others, and different traditions have different calculations as to what we're trying to do here, with these experiences, which ones lead towards progress, and et cetera. And these different traditions get crystallized into dogmas. And then in the modern period, we now have available to us, because of the internet, because of everything else, travel, et cetera, we're able to access all of these different techniques, leading to all sorts of different phenomena, all kinds of different experiences. But the premise of the book is that we kind of need an upgrade in terms of our worldview in order to match the upgrade that we're getting in terms of the accessibility that we have now to this wide range of different experiences, so that we're not trying to accommodate or make sense of or understand a massive menu of different kinds of experiences through the more limited lens of one particular tradition that perhaps was, the product of a particular time and place, and didn't necessarily have all of these different experiences available. So it's just kind of zooming out and taking a look at kind of the whole landscape and how different traditions may or may not fit together, how they might be pointing towards the same thing or not, and just allowing us to have a more capacious kind of flexible kind of philosophy as we approach these traditions and the experiences that they can unlock for us. So that's the purpose of the Multidharma. So I think Lamp Unto Yourself is kind of opening up the possibilities for people who are just starting to get them thinking in that way, and then Multidharma provides the map. Like, here is a model, and it's just a model. It's just a map. It's not. I'm not making any truth claims in the map about what's ultimately going on, what's real, what's better than the other. It's not a hierarchical structure, but it's just attempting to sort of draw a map that is broad enough to capture to hint at or to point at the whole territory and how things fit together.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's kind of the raft that will eventually be seen to just be dissolved into meaninglessness. Yeah, exactly. But the raft is still apparently necessary for some. I mean, that may work for some, and there are other maps that work for others.
Exactly. I mean, that was the point I was just going to say. Is that this map isn't any more right than the other maps. It's just an alternative that might be more helpful or more resonant for some people than others. So if you're happy with the maps and the teachings that you're getting from, Tibetan Buddhism or TM or Christian mysticism or whatever tradition you're part of, if you're happy with the teachings there and they make sense and you see yourself, reflected in the teachings and they're leading to, deeper and deeper experiences, great. Go with the map that's working. This map is for people, the misfits. These are for the people who are kind of, they tried those different traditions and they don't quite fit into it. Things are happening that are a little bit, off the map. Things are happening that are a little bit, strange or difficult to deal with. And where we're at in the moment is, like you were saying, if you report certain kinds of experiences to certain kind of practitioners, teachers, they might denigrate your experience, they might dismiss your experience, or they might pathologize your experience, telling you your experiences, the things, these openings that you're having are, incorrect. They're ignorant, they're counterproductive, etc. Meanwhile, some other tradition might be aiming for exactly the kind of thing that you're experiencing, right? And so the disjuncture, the cognitive dissonance between your own experiences and then what your tradition is telling you, and this quest to go and find a tradition that's going to validate what my experiences are, and a lot of people turn against themselves, like doubting their experiences, doubting their, is it, maybe I'm just going crazy. Maybe this is, maybe something's wrong with me. And I think a lot of that sort of tension, a lot of that kind of self-doubt might potentially be cleared up by looking at a more capacious map. And so that's kind of what the purpose was here.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, spiritual emergency. And so, I don't know if we want to jump right into this right now, but one of the things that the map is kind of in the background of the creation of the map for me was, I came both as a practitioner, a very long time practitioner of spiritual traditions, but also a scholar of those traditions. I had been looking recently at spiritual emergency, spiritual crisis, and finding that a lot of it had to do with lack of context. A lot of it has to do with people pathologizing or medicalizing something that if they had a certain kind of perspective from a particular traditional spiritual approach, they may have seen it a completely different way. Mm-hmm. And so part of what's going on here is just providing this capacious, open, flexible map for people to see, I'm not having a spiritual emergency. This is a recognized kind of experience that is, I just was working with the emptiness thread, and this experience is on the energy thread. There's nothing wrong with me. This is a mapped out territory. This is a known quantity, and there's traditions around the world that have valued this and that have talked about it. And there's resources, there's teachers, there's teachings, there's a place for these kinds of experiences. So that's kind of that orienting context can sometimes make all the difference for somebody in a crisis situation.
Honestly, I think if we did nothing else but reach some of those people, this would be totally have its intrinsic worth. This discussion, my own wife was telling me yesterday, if I didn't know you, Zubin, like some of the experiences I've had in this thing, I would have absolutely thought I was going crazy. I needed to stop this line of whatever's happening, whether it's energy, whether it's unconscious stuff coming up, whether it's this sense of everything is without substance. I would have thought I'm being derealized or depersonalized, or all the pathology that we read about in our psychiatric rotation in medical school. And instead, I've leaned into it in a way where it's like, oh, okay, this is a valuable experience. Like, this is okay. And it inevitably has proven in some way fruitful. And the next thing then shows up. And so that's why I think it's so important to dive into the experiential phenomenology of each of these threads so people can see, that's okay. And I want to make it interactive. So for the audience, what you can do, if you're on a podcast, you can leave comments on Spotify, or you can leave a review saying, these are my experiences. If you're on YouTube or Facebook in our Awakening thread on Facebook, you can leave comments on the video and say, okay, here's my experience of emptiness, or here's my experience in the energy thread, here's my experience in the unity thread, here's my experience in the unconscious. And not only is that a way to express what you've had, but it shares with others, and you'll find that people will respond to your comment and say, I had the exact same thing with a slightly different flavor. It's not just to seek validation, it's to understand that these are actually valued normal phenomena that happen in each of these threads. You're not abnormal, you're not broken, and you're not crazy most of the time. Sometimes I wonder about myself still, Pierce, but that's just me.
Yeah. Well, and we should say also that, I mean, this isn't to deny that there are things called mental health crises, right?
Yes.
So, and extreme spiritual experiences can provoke mental health crises. So we're not saying, don't seek
help.
Medical help if you need it. Don't seek, help from therapists, from other kinds of, conventional medical and mental health supports. We're definitely not saying don't do that, because certainly, if somebody's feeling drawn towards seeking that kind of support, then they should do it, I think. However, we're saying, what we are saying is there are also, in addition, many other kinds of supports that know a lot about this territory, and that you just maybe should be aware of the whole gamut of different kinds of help that's out there before deciding definitively, I need to go on some kind of antipsychotic medication, right? When in fact there's a tradition out there that values exactly the experience you're having, that may be able to contextualize it for you.
And I think what you said about the two can coexist. So I've talked to a few people who've reached out who've said, I've experienced this destabilizing emptiness and no time, no space, this thing. But then the way they express is, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm having trouble at work, I have trouble with relationships. And it's like, okay, so I think a therapist would be incredibly helpful. And they do that and they find huge benefit while they're still having the phenomenology of emptiness thread. So they're not mutually exclusive. They actually might co-support in many ways. So like you said, we're not discouraging people or saying, oh, everything is pathologizing and all that. No. It's the whole gamut is part of this. So that said, Pierce, with the longest introduction ever, we just, I get into every moment of this, so I tend to draw it out because I'm just fascinated by it. Let's dive into what you call, it's the emptiness thread, or the deconstruction thread of Flavor of Awakening. Can you remind us what that thread is like?
Yeah, sure. So there's 4 threads, and for the purposes of this model, I find it helpful to separate them out and talk about them separately. So a lot of people, particularly after a certain point of depth within the practice, they will arrive at a place where these threads some people just start off with the kind of experience, and most people get to it eventually, where there's the kind of intersection of these threads. They start to either intertwine together or blend together, and so people will often object to the model, saying, well, you separated out these two things that actually should be put together, and that's right. You're talking from the perspective of integration, from a later sort of development within the spiritual process. These things do combine together, and at that point they should be talked about together. But for the purposes of this model, I like to separate them out and sort of talk about these as distinct threads, because I think it's helpful. I think it provides some clarity for helping people to orient to which threads they are most resonant with, which threads they perhaps are most familiar with, which threads they know the traditions that are associated with those threads. And I also kind of think that people, I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm a historian and a practitioner. So I it's just a speculation, but I imagine that there is some kind of like natural proclivity that certain people have. I don't know if it's your brain. I don't know if it's your upbringing, your culture, your karma, who knows why, but I feel like some people are just kind of like naturally inclined towards one thread or another. And so, so I like to separate them out just for clarity. So with that caveat, we can jump into the emptiness thread. So
Perfect.
I had to choose one name. I chose emptiness. I also use the term deconstruction. I also use the term de-reification. And so this thread is so this is all of the traditions, all of the practices, all of the kinds of spiritual phenomena that can take place that involve the deconstruction of concepts, the seeing through of constructs, the de-reification, or the making unreal, or seeing the mirage-like nature of experiences and so forth. So it's also important here to distinguish between philosophical or thought-based deconstruction versus experiential, phenomenological deconstruction. So thought-based deconstruction is really helpful. It can be extremely supportive. To read, I don't know, Buddhist philosophy or, other kinds of forms of philosophy that talk about, how constructs, the self, for example, is a construct, and here's all the ways that it can, that it can't be a real thing. It might be helpful to study neuroscience and understand how the self is a product of certain kinds of brain functions, right? That kind of conceptual deconstruction can be supportive. It can be helpful.
And even quantum mechanics, which would say the same thing for the physical realm, right? Like these are probability waves emerging from a void vacuum. Yeah.
A lot of people find that to be supportive or helpful. So all of that's great. But what we're talking about here is awakening experiences. And I defined what I mean by awakening experiences in the previous conversation, but it's the sometimes dramatic, sometimes very immediate and sudden, but also it can be slow and happen over time. But it's the disentangling of the identity from the narrative self, from the everyday self, and that identity landing somewhere else in a more capacious, more kind of encompassing kind of self or non-self. And so in this case, an awakening experience of the emptiness thread would be the seeing through, the deconstruction, the derealization of the concept of identity. Previously, I thought I was Pierce. Previously, I thought I was, a father, a professor, this, that, and the other. My whole life was organized around that identity. I got value out of that identity. I really saw that was who I was, and like my whole world was centered around that version of me. And suddenly I see that is a fabrication, or that is just a concept that I've been carrying around, or that is that center that I built around that, the center falls away. So there's a lot of ways that people experience that and language it. It depends on the tradition. It depends on the practice. So for me, coming out of more of a Buddhist background, a lot of Buddhist meditation, I would say the majority of Buddhist meditation is actually focused on provoking this kind of experience usually by gradually dissolving certain kinds of structures to kind of break through this. So, there's practices like jhana practices and vipassana kind of practices that are specifically targeted at deconstructing parts of the world, including the self. So I think for the most part, Buddhist styles of practice that I was involved in were more gradual focused. They kind of like peeled away layers of the self little by little. But in my own experience, I had I had been doing lots of Buddhist meditation kind of practices. I was kind of a meditation junkie for like 5 years and never got anywhere with it.
I remember this. I did this too.
Yeah. So I had for me, it generated a lot of striving and a lot of kind of like, I don't know, a lot of
seeking energy and doership and the opposite of what it's designed to do, apparently, which is deconstruct the self. Instead, it's like, here's a self that needs to get this thing. Why am I not getting it? I need to work harder. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. So just it winds up kind of reinforcing the self. So that style of practice didn't work for me, but it could work. It works for many people, and that
definitely,
think people should seek out whatever version of the practices is going to work for them. So what worked more for me are kind of what might be called pointing instructions. More kind of like targeted towards suddenly seeing through the self construct. So there's lots of different kinds of traditions. There's Zen has koans and other kinds of pointers. Tibetan Buddhism has pointers and so forth. But then there's there's pointing practices outside of the Buddhist orbit. There's Advaita style inquiry, inquiring into the self. Who is this that sees? Who is this that, who am I? Those kinds of inquiries, I think, are also geared towards us seeing through the concept of the self. Headless Way is kind of a more modern, quirky sort of version of this pointing instruction. That's actually what worked for me.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. The first time the Headless Way kind of clicked, I'm pointing here and then I point back, what's here? And it's just pop, there it is. The self is gone and you're everything. Yeah. So it's funny what can click. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that clicked for me because I as a scholar, I had studied Buddhism. I had practiced Buddhism, but I was also a scholar. So I've had this whole apparatus in my head around, all the theories and doctrines and so forth. And so whenever I would hear Buddhist doctrine, it would always go through this kind of like mental processor, right? So for me, Headless Way, because it was like, it's this quirky, it's not Buddhist at all. It's this quirky sort of like way of talking in a completely fresh and different way that I had never heard before. And it just like, oh.
Yeah. And it's purely experiential. Yeah. It's purely like, here's what the experience is like. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, there's lots of different, the point is there's lots of different techniques, lots of different traditions, lots of different language for talking about this sort of like seeing through the self. And then different people, I think, experience it differently too.
I want to say one thing about that is like Sam Harris in his podcast, it really, really dwells on this slow approach, like the slow deconstruction that you talked about initially versus the direct pointing out instructions, and just spends hours and hours and hours kind of mentally masturbating between the two, which is fun. But again, I think your point is, hey man, one or the other might work, and it might be that they're sequential, like you exhaust one and the other pops up. It's really hard to say. Everybody's different.
Yeah, that's right. So speaking from the perspective of the Multidharma model, right, which is the perspective that I'll be, so I just don't have to keep saying that. Just know that everything I'm saying here is coming from this one particular model's perspective. It doesn't matter which technique you use or which practice tradition you're in. What matters is getting the actual result to take place, right? So I know from within traditional models, it really matters that you're within a certain kind of doctrinal framework. Like you have to get the view right before you do the practices in many traditions. But from the Multidharma perspective, we can just say, there are many traditions globally, particularly Asian traditions that are focused on seeing through the self in this way, in this deconstructive, de-reification kind of way.
Mhm.
So then that opens a thread, um, so that we go from um, seeing through the self. There's an opening of a kind of a path of deconstruction, a trajectory of deconstruction, where we're going to proceed sort of like deeper and deeper into more and more concepts falling away, more and more things that appeared to be real falling away or being seen through or being deconstructed. And so exactly what avenue, which concepts, the whether it's supposed to happen quickly or slowly, whether it's you're being led step by step or kind of spontaneously, all of that is different from tradition to tradition. So all of that can be quite specific, how they guide you through that. But the point is here to gradually work your way through the deconstruction of pretty fundamental bases of reality, things like time, space, inside, outside, self and other, subject, object, right? Just gradually start collapsing or dissolving.
And those dissolutions can happen in a linear feeling way, or they can happen in a chaotic, like everything's gone. And then you back up to, I feel like a solid self again, and there's inside and outside, and there's time and space, to some variant of that. And for me, it showed up over many years, actually. Like you would get a solid, like you do a 7-day silent retreat where all it is just sitting. And you can have those insights that there is nothing happening at all. There's absolute zero. And this is just a foam on zero. And then it can reify in a way where, and then back again to time is not a thing. Like there's always eternally this, to, this is just pure sensation. It's empty of any substance. And ultimately for me, what happened was it thinned out. And it was a little insidious, because I kept looking for these big experiences, because I would see this tradition would say, you have the great death in Zen, or you have, in Advaita, you're already enlightened, all this stuff. And I'm like, that sure doesn't feel like that. And then after time, for me, what happened was suddenly it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't take any of this seriously. I can be sincere about living, but this is empty. If any concept I put on it is like a graphical user interface overlaying on something totally empty and unknowable, empty of real substance, just absolutely impermanent and dancing. And so that's how it showed up for me. But you could say it was the meditation. It was maybe some experiences with psychedelics that gave a glimpse. It was maybe a lot of direct pointing from people that showed me that. But I can't say the cause. All I can say is, okay, now it feels like this. And so I think a lot of people feel like it should be a certain way because they see people talking this way. And this is, again, the Multidharma approach is like, no, actually it can show up in all these ways.
Yeah. I mean, so different traditions have this sort of script that it should go like this. It should be like, now once you see through this, then you see through that. Once you see through that, then you see through the other. And that it should happen in 4 cycles, or that it should happen, in this way or that way. And yeah, so the benefit of the threads model is just say, okay, there's a thread there. There's a trajectory there. It goes from seeing through the self down to seeing through every other fundamental concept, down all the way down to nothing whatsoever arising anywhere. And the way that people move down that trajectory can be determined or influenced by the traditions, by the practices, also maybe by their own kind of orientation or configuration. Some people can move very gradually down and it's this nice smooth ride. Other people can, like it sounds like you were doing, this is what happened to me too. You kind of hop down to some pretty deep territory and then suddenly yo-yo back up to, to the beginning, and then hop down again and then back. And in my case, it was kind of like leapfrogging, like down 2 steps down, 10 steps down, 5 steps back, sort of like leapfrogging sort of thing. Other people just hop right down to the end and sink in there. And I mean, who knows? It just happens It happens differently for different people for different reasons. The Multidharma is not a prescribing certain kinds of practices or certain kinds of methodologies or certain kinds of ways. It's Multidharma is descriptive rather than prescriptive. It's just sort of like, here's the whole emptiness thread thing. Here's kind of how it works in the long run.
Yeah, and you know, it going with that, if you jump suddenly to a deep aspect of emptiness thread, this is where this apparent spiritual crisis or emergency might show up, when suddenly there is no sense of center. The center drops and there's just bruh. It can feel like what the psychiatrists describe as derealization, depersonalization, these pathologized things, which do happen. But there is actually no sense of center or self, and people with no context can be very destabilized. They can speak in a way that they sound literally like they're crazy, because in the standard human operating system, which you talked about, that you wake up, say, out of, this makes no sense at all. It sounds like crazy talk.
Yeah. And so particularly with those sort of like long hops all the way down to deep territory on the thread, that is where people, if they don't have the context, can get into trouble. Even with context, it can be like, wow, I read about this, but whoa, I didn't know they meant it literally, or like, whoa, this is,
they weren't kidding.
This is too much. Yeah, they weren't kidding. And I'd like to sort of like,
back out,
ease back a little bit. And so that, there's good advice to sort of do, to modify your practice a little bit to sort of back out of something that's too much, and then work your way down more gradually back into it. That people, teachers who are familiar with this territory will be good at advising individuals who are having this kind of experience, right? So if you're, I don't know, in a yoga class and, or in church, and you don't have any context for this kind of thing, and you're just doing, you're practicing in some other thread, and suddenly, boom, you land in, nothing's real, and I can't find myself or any center, any solid center anymore. And that seems scary and seems disorienting. Then just know that there's plenty of support and teachings and advice and books to read and people to talk to, right? If it was within this thread, and what they're doing.
That's exactly right. And then the sort of an opposite version of this is a pitfall on this path, which is the conceptual understanding of no self or de-reification or emptiness or no time, no space. You can conceptually, you can learn about it. People can talk about it, and you can start to replace one belief, I'm a self moving through space and time, with another belief, I'm not a self. And you see this show up a lot of times in Advaita circles, is my experience with it, where people are commenting saying, who is asking this question? What is this? And you talk to them and you realize that this is all conceptual. They're not actually having the experience of no self. They're talking themselves into it or believing it as a doctrine. And we're talking about experience, not ontology, not a doctrine.
Yeah. I think that's very helpful to keep repeating that. So like for all of these threads, that is the only thing that I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about, a philosophy of non-self, or an intellectual understanding of non-self. I'm talking about the experiential reality of things breaking apart. So it might be helpful. It might be helpful to sort of like talk about some of the main areas of this thread, and I'm not going to say they should happen in this order, or that everybody's going to experience everything exactly the same, but there are some kind of like areas of the thread that people can experience. Some of them are the breakdown of large conceptual objects like self, time, space, in and out, inside, outside, etc. The concepts that you had about those, the thoughts that you had about those things suddenly don't make sense anymore. But what I'm talking about is the actual experience of those things don't make sense anymore. So like the thought, oh, my body, I can see how, it's just a concept of body. That's a conceptual realization. But the disappearance of the body, right? The body actually like not being a thing anymore that you can find within your experience, that's a different kind of thing altogether. So, I can see how time and space are constructs. That's one thing, but then to not be able to experience time anymore is a different order of it's a different order of experience, a different order of realization.
Yeah, and in a way, when that experience actually happens, it's very hard to go leave a comment on someone else's YouTube video about it. So often I find, this is my own space as YouTube, is people will say, well, why are you talking this way? You realize there's no time. It's like, well, I can just tell by the way you're writing about this that you're experiencing time. Because the experience of no time is, of course, you can't tell anything about anyone's internal state, but it's like, it's a very different order than any conceptualizing, like you said. And so it's good to raise that distinction. These are experiential phenomena. Like when the body is no longer findable and it's just what is, that is a very disorienting and profoundly unconceptualizable experience. Yeah.
So like one example, maybe I'll just say something from my own experience. One example of how this might look is, so for me, the initial shift into the initial experience into the opening of the emptiness thread was, like I said, through Headless Way. And Headless Way it's a game. It's a silly little thing, but you kind of, there's this pointer that points to it points you away from the self and to seeing the kind of the mirage or the illusion of the self. But the way that showed up for me wasn't just like, I realize I'm not a self. The way that showed up for me was the like reality that is normally had been for me. Normally had consisted of objects, right? I look around the world and I see tables and chairs and windows and, my body sitting in this chair and so forth. What happened was somehow all of the visual data got separated out into little kind of like packets of visual data, and all of the sensory data, like body sensations, got separated out into little packets of sensory data, and the auditory data got separated out into little packets of auditory data. They all got disaggregated from each other, so they were no longer sort of like objects that were clusters of sensory data together. It just became like little kind of scattered sensory phenomena, kind of like here and there, unorganized into objects. And in that space, sort of like any kind of self or center just turned out to be other packets of information. So it really was like a discombobulating, disconcerting experience. I actually was at the gym when it happened, so I was like, I wasn't in like meditation even. And suddenly the whole world just kind of dissolves into little bubbles. So that's not how it has to happen. I don't want anybody to think like my experiences are somehow like normative or the way they should be, but that's just an example of, the visceral, experiential kind of quality of dissolution that I'm talking about. It's not just like, I realize I'm not a self. It was just like all of reality kind of like crumbled into little particles. Experientially, and I just sat there like, whoa, I can't move. I can't, like, I'm certainly not gonna get up and do another set.
It's so funny, Pierce. So a couple things, reflections on this. The first time Headless Way clicked for me, I was on a Stairmaster. So I was listening to some book or something, and I did the exercise on the Stairmaster, and suddenly that was it. And I was like, I got to get off this thing. Like, it was that disorienting. So yeah, it can happen. It doesn't have to happen in meditation. It's just anywhere it can happen. The second thing is, there's something about even the way you're pointing at the visceral experience, the way you're describing it, that drops concepts and is a pointing out instruction in itself. So as you were speaking it, I could feel that same phenomenology showing up. And so this is one other aspect of the kind of transmission of this that is in certain traditions, the pointing out. And that's kind of what you were doing just there. You're like, okay, it can kind of be like this. And it's pointing at the phenomenology, not the conceptual shit. So I just want to point out, if people were listening to that and tripping out, that's not unusual.
Yeah. So the in the Multidharma model, what I talk about is there being kind of like a guiding question for each one of these threads, and we talked about this in the last episode. But the guiding question for the emptiness thread is well, what still seems real? Like, what seems real, and is it actually that way? And so in the model, in the experience that I just described with these kind of phenomena now disaggregated, the objects no longer seem real, but what still seems real? So for me, the next sort of step in this process of kind of, moving down the emptiness trajectory, was to look at the individual packets of phenomena, because those seem to be real. Those seem to be there, right? The objects broke apart, but the phenomena were there. So those seem real. Well, is it really that way? And so an investigation into that wound up sort of de-reifying, deconstructing the sensory sensory phenomena, like the little packets of sensory phenomena that seem to be real, seem to be present, kind of became unfindable, became very sort of like thinner and thinner and more sort of more de-reified, not able to find them, not able to pin them down. And at that point I experienced sort of like what a lot of people talk about. There's kind of a place on this emptiness thread where the senses themselves start to sort of melt, I guess. They visual phenomena, visual phenomena becomes pixelated, becomes very sort of like unstable. Auditory phenomena become unstable. Tactile sensory phenomena, everything becomes very sort of like mirage like, not really there, sort of arising but not really present. Different people have different ways of talking about it.
Man, I just love listening. This is because it's right there, right? Keep going. Sorry. I'm just enjoying it.
And just continuing to work down the emptiness thread, there's a place where many people describe kind of like the lights go out, sort of like consciousness itself collapses. This kind of the seer or the witness or the awareness that is aware of the fuzziness of the phenomena, right? The sort of like implies that there's a stable awareness that is seeing the objects deconstructing and the phenomena kind of fizzling out, but the stability of that subject, the stability of that awareness also, it seems to be real, and you turn towards it and you're like, is it actually so? And it turns out that stability of that awareness is also an illusion, and the awareness itself, the consciousness itself, can't be found, sort of dissolves under your fingers. And you have the sort of destabilization of both of the subject and object, and they kind of both collapse into what many traditions talk about, in different ways, but it's sort of like a void where there are no sensory inputs at all. There's not anything going on at all. So in Buddhism, usually people talk about cessation in English, but there's sort of like a fading out of experience, and then a disappearance of experience altogether. So that's another kind of area of the thread.
Sorry. I just love, I love re-experiencing aspects of this thread, because more lately it's when these threads kind of drop a bit, it's hard you can't really go back and have some of these phenomenal experiences the way that you used to. It's like a very, it's just life. It just becomes all integrated. And so to kind of ride down that thread with your phenomenal descriptions, It is like that. That's viscerally what it is like. And that cessation, you can't really talk about it because there's nothing there, it seemingly, when that happens. When you come back, though, you see the mind almost reform reality, reconceptualize it, reify it, and you kind of see, oh, this is how the whole manifestation comes about. Wow. And it's felt viscerally. Yeah.
That's right. And once you see the process of reification of how reality is produced, then that process itself, no longer, you might have to see it a couple of times, but anyway, once you see how it's working, you no longer are bewitched by the reification, because you're just like, oh, I can see, it's like once you know that virtual reality is being rendered, once you can see it being rendered, then you no longer believe that it's reality, right? So, you still live and operate within the VR, environment, but you just know everything's being rendered, through this process. And I think for me, the seeing things being rendered is critical, super important. But for me, there was something else that was really critical with this kind of cessation experience, which was the definitive realization that there is no background. Mm-hmm. So that there, because in your mind, in your mental construct of what emptiness is like, it's like there's a subject that is seeing that there's nothing happening, and so the subject is still a background of some sort, or there's like a ground of being where nothing happens,
right?
And
so a knowingness,
ground. A knowingness that nothing's happening. There's something that's the background for the nothing happening. And so for me, the real sort of punchline of the cessation for me was the clear seeing of like, oh, there is no background. Like nothing means nothing. Not nothing happening within, against a background. It's just nothing means nothing. It means not no awareness, no consciousness, no background, no experiencing, no presence. It means just gone. Yeah.
So absolute zero. Absolute zero. Yeah. And so I want to say one thing about this that occurred to me. This is ontologically, meaning like, okay, what is the real nature of reality? This is compatible with almost everything. So this says nothing about the nature of reality, because you can have this experience of absolute zero and then reconstruct a world, see how it's rendered, and that's completely consistent with a materialist worldview that you're an organism whose brain is creating reality from sensory inputs, and when the sensory inputs stop, there's no reality, there's no creation, the brain waves go to zero, and then they spin back up. So this says nothing about the nature of reality. This is pure phenomenal experience. Yeah.
So although different religions have made ontologies out of these experiences of the thread, so you will have traditions and individuals that will subscribe to because I experienced this in my spiritual practice, therefore that's an accurate description of how the universe works. And so so I just avoid
any of that,
any of the ontological kind of ramifications of these experiences, and just say like this is the way that it's experienced.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what was like a Brahman, para-Brahman? Like Brahman is that kind of consciousness. I mean, so each tradition has its own sort of spin on this. But the actual phenomenal experience can be so profoundly affecting in a way. You could see why different cultures would spin stories around it, because when the mind comes back, it has nothing to do but to try to make sense of something that has no sense in that way.
Yeah, and also like these experiences have in them a certain kind of quality. Like all of these experiences really do feel like you have, because especially on the emptiness thread, when you're seeing through the concepts and you're seeing this kind of what appears to be like an underlying mental process that's rendering these concepts like a virtual reality, and you can see how they're being kind of produced. It really does feel like you're getting kind of a peek under the mechanism that's producing reality and seeing like the ultimate truth underneath it. It really
it feels like that. Yeah, it feels like
really
that. It has
feels
a
like that.
feeling of revealed truth, a feeling of exactly.
To the extent I might even include that in my definition, of like having a phenomenological experiential experience, having a real sort of embodied visceral awakening experience. I might even say, that like really feeling like you've seen the ultimate truth might be part of the definition. Like it's almost required that you have that sort of reaction for it to be a legitimate awakening experience. It should.
I agree. I agree, and it's how they often will define mystical experiences. This is this feeling of revealed truth, of veracity of truth, and it's also a good etiology or cause for some of the side effects of these different threads, which is the spiritual ego that comes back and says, I have seen truth and I will show you heathens what's up. You don't know, I do. And that's one of the side effects that mind will take from it.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah.
Good stuff. Emptiness is a trip. It still trips me out. Yeah.
Yeah. So ultimately, like each one of these threads kind of goes down to the end. And again, we're just kind of separating this out for analysis and for talking about it. In actual practice, I think if people are operating with more than one thread and they're sort of braiding things together, I actually think most people arrive towards the end of the threads in a more blended kind of experience than what I'm describing right now. I've just kind of separated out just the emptiness aspects in order to talk about them separately for clarity purposes. But in actual practice, like by the end, by the depths of the emptiness thread, there probably will be other threads mixed in. But all of these threads move towards, this subject object kind of duality collapsing. And in this case, it's a collapse into just abject, like complete annihilation. Nothing is there whatsoever. And then, we can talk about this later, but then the sort of the dropping of this thread, like the letting go of this thread, or the sort of like the thread is really finished and now can be set down, happens when even the distinction between emptiness and non-emptiness kind of ceases to, even that distinction gets hollowed out, right? Even that distinction drops away, is seen through, is de-reified. So, the emptiness of emptiness, or the letting go of the position of seeing things as empty, right? And then you sort of drop this thread, and the thread is now kind of gone. It's not gone because things stopped being empty and went back to being non-empty, right? It's just gone because the distinction between whether things are empty or not, just sort of like that last kind of distinction falls away, and the whole thread just sort of goes in. It's just relegated to meaninglessness, or to like, who cares?
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to say it. That's why actually I was reflecting in my own experience listening to you talk about this thread, because it's very hard for me to sit and meditate now and feel into empty nature of reality, because it's exactly that. It's like, why? Like, why make any distinctions about that? Like, this is just obviously how you can't say anything about it. It's very visceral. It viscerally falls away. But then to go down and feel the experiential flashes of that again, it's almost like entertainment. It's like watching a good movie.
Yeah,
for me.
Yeah, I think the going down the thread, when you're going down the thread, and these things kind of empty out, they're I mean, especially if it's happening rather in these kind of like leaps forward. If it's gradual and just happening more sort of like gradual thinning, it might not kind of seem like any big deal. But if you're doing these kind of jumps where suddenly a bunch of stuff falls away, and then suddenly a bunch more stuff falls away, it can be pretty dramatic. It can be pretty like, whoa, where did everything go? It can also be there can also be a lot of fascination with what you discover each next layer down. So like for me, one experience that was kind of memorable was, I would take a walk every day, and I realized that I sort of wasn't actually seeing the visual phenomena around me, because I was just kind of like glossing it over mentally with a concept that was just like tree, house, car. The mind would sort of like label something, and it would respond to a world of concepts without actually experiencing the sensory content. And so when those concepts fell, tree, house, car kind of fell, I was left with like this like amazingly beautiful display of like colorful pixels of light shimmering. What I used to call a tree, I now realize is just like this explosion of like, the most amazing visual stimuli, right? And the thing I used to gloss as house now was just like, boom, this like, explosion of color, and everything is just so saturated and rich. And, so in that moment, you could just be like, wow, like, just blown away by this amazingness. What I'm saying is, anyway, all of this becomes like the new normal as you're moving down the thread. You sort of, your brain, your mind, I don't know what, just acclimates to these kinds of experiences. And so, eventually it's just not a big deal. Like, that's just the way that the vision works, is, that there's not these kind of like, conceptual kind of overlays. It's just like sort of seemingly more raw sensory input coming in, but there's no need to sort of be amazed by it, because it's just the way the eyes work, right? So it's, or the pixelation that for a while was like, whoa, my vision's so pixelated. Wow, this is so like weird. Eventually it's just like, well, it's just the way vision happens. There's nothing special about it, or notable about it. And so I think you need that kind of like acclimatization to the dissolution of the emptiness thread, for it to finally let go. Because part of like letting go of the thread is just like, it's no longer fascinating. It's no longer drawing your interest. It's no longer even worth commenting on or worth noting that things are empty, because that's just how they are. And so there's nothing special about that sort of way of seeing things.
Yeah.
And so it can just be the brain can just like, or the mind can just sort of give up its hands and say, okay, I don't need to pay attention to it anymore. If that's the way things are, then that's the way things are, and I don't need to listen to it.
Yeah.
In the same way, the hum of my refrigerator, when I first step into the room, I can hear it, but after an hour in the room, in the kitchen, I can't hear it anymore. It's the same sort of thing, I think, where it's just sort of these previously amazing phenomena just kind of fade into the background and become irrelevant, not even perceived.
Yeah. It almost feels like, in a sense, well, we talked about that last time, that like something has been lost, like that wonder of the moment has been lost, but it's not that. It's exactly what you're saying. It's like, this is new normal.
Yeah. So I prefer to say, like, for me, the model has like the opening of the threads, the deepening of the threads, the braiding of the threads, the integrating of the threads together, and then there's the release of the threads. And so for me, like, just in the language that I use, I would say something like, it's just become so integrated that it no longer stands out as a separate thing to pay attention to, because it's just so much a part of it that it's not notable as a separate thing.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. So emptiness is no longer notable as a separate thing, and it can just be like, oh,
it's the emptiness of emptiness, like you said. Yeah.
That's a Buddhist quote. So
yeah, it is. Yeah. But I think I like it. It's very, it applies in this way. Gorgeous. Okay. So that's the emptiness thread. That was a really nice discussion, because it actually pulled in integration, braiding, some different aspects of this, thread release. Which thread would you like to tackle next?
Well, we should go to oneness. I actually maybe should have started with oneness, because that for me, that was the first thread to open. I don't know about you, Zubin.
It was
What your first
emptiness
thread?
for me. Yeah, oneness is caught up later. Yeah.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
all right. So I was the
Everybody's different.
opposite.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So oneness thread. Yeah. So again, we talked about it in the last in the last time we had a conversation. So here we're talking about the traditions, the practices, also the phenomenology, the spiritual experiences that relate to kind of the opposite of what we were just talking about. If emptiness is like the hollowing out, the negation, the neti direction of things, this is the plus yes and kind of direction of things. So spiritual traditions, religions, ontologies that kind of will posit like a wholeness, a unity. Sometimes they'll call it God. Sometimes they'll use whatever various Asian languages or other parts of the world. I think this is where Christian mysticism is pointing. I think this is where, from what I know about Sufi Islamic mysticism, I think it's pointing in this direction. I'm not really an expert in Western traditions, but certainly in Asia, you have the most of the Hindu traditions are actually working in this direction, and actually, I think Mahayana Buddhism is also kind of braiding together emptiness with this oneness thread. So here the practices are largely pointing towards kind of expanding the self as opposed to seeing through it and negating it. So it's seeing the interconnection between, first of all, it's seeing the interconnection between the self and other beings, so that they're separate, but they're intimately intertwined in some way. And then, beyond that, to kind of the identity of all beings as being part of the same thing. So, part of the same sort of living organism. We're all part of Gaia. We're all, maybe it might be a sort of a neo-pagan way of saying it. Or we're all, the same awareness looking out through all of these different beings' eyes, or the same God looking out through everybody's eyes. We're all somehow the same entity. And then beyond that, there is sort of like the whole universe is all somehow the same thing, the same unity, the same God, the same divine being, divine entity. Again, different words to use for that in different traditions. So the experience. So that's the kind of on the more conceptual, theoretical end of thing. But then experientially, how that opens up for people, again, totally different from person to person. You can move slowly down the thread or jump around. You can hop down to the end and then yo-yo back and forth. You can experience different aspects of it. You can also language it and think about it in totally different ways, depending on your tradition and so forth. But again, there's some kind of like regions of the thread that might be worth kind of like, talking about phenomenologically, experientially, what they feel like. Just interrupt me if you want me to stop.
Oh no, it's funny because I'm feeling into, because like you said, there's this conceptual realm. It's like, oh yeah, we're all intertwined. Or there's one thing happening, whatever. And then there's the experiential realm, which is, again, it's very tactile and it can open in many different ways. For some people, like the first experience I ever had with that kind of thing was using an empathogen, MDMA, years and years and years ago, and realizing that I had an unbounded compassion for all beings. And that was felt artificial, but it trailed over days. And I was like, oh, and I think Sam Harris tells a similar story about his own opening was a hard opening with that. But it can show up in so many different and surprising ways. And it does tend to, in my experience, so many people entwine this with an ontologic explanation. God's love is coming through me, or, we're all God's children, or there's a million different ontologies here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, like to skip the ontologies and just go right to the phenomenology. So I also had a similar experience to what you were just describing, but I should say I've never had any kind of plant medicines or other kinds of entheogens being part of my spiritual practice. So it's not to say that they're not amazing. I think, if they're part of what people are doing, then, I would include them within the range of different kinds of spiritual technologies that we have available to us. Everything from, meditation, yoga, prayer, chanting, fasting, vision quest, dark retreat,
breath work,
you name it.
Yeah.
Breath work, shamanic journeying, drumming, aesthetic experiences, wilderness retreats. I mean, I think all of it is valuable, or all of it can be valuable. I think all of it can also be dangerous or unskillfully used.
Agree.
In the wrong hands, any one of these techniques can be problematic. So I'm not
including non-pharmacologic techniques like Vipassana meditation.
Yeah.
Goenka retreat.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
And any of these can be, weaponized. They can be, overdosed. They can be, engaged with in various kinds of unskillful ways, and or be, abused by individuals with, their own agendas and so forth. So, maybe, psychedelics has its own particular kinds of dangers that, some of these other practices don't. But I think if people are using them skillfully and they're doing something for them, then okay, great. It hasn't been part of my practice, but I did practice quite a bit of metta bhavana meditation, which is loving kindness meditation that is specifically focused on heart sensory sensations in the heart, and sort of like using certain kinds of language and repetitive phrases in order to kind of generate a feeling of loving kindness, and then to sort of like spread that out. So it's kind of like an intentional step-by-step way of constructing the experience that you said you would have maybe more spontaneously.
I've experienced that meditation, and it feels just like MDMA. It's identical phenomenologically. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, I just want to say that is actually one of the most common openings for this thread, is some kind of heart opening experience where there's a recognition, it's I'm me and those beings are them, right? It's not like a merger, but there's a sense of compassion, there's a sense of love, a sense of intimacy, a sense of connection between myself and the other, the others, that is sort of like generated experientially. So you're actually feeling that connection. You're actually feeling you're not just, theoretically I'm connected with that, animal because we're both breathing the same oxygen or something like that. It's an actual, an actual felt intimacy with other beings, with all life, with all beings across the universe, with all existence. And yeah, again, there's lots of practices, lots of different techniques to do in order to sort of open up that kind of experience. And it can open up in hugely dramatic and overwhelming ways, or it can open up in slow, really peaceful and gradual ways. Lots of different languaging and talking about the experience. But yeah, so that would be like an opening of the oneness kind. I used to think I was just peers in my little life, and I had, was centered around my job and my roles and so forth. But now I see that I'm intimately connected with all beings, and I'm like, this love is like flowing through me that connects me with them.
And like you said, it's tactile, it's kinesthetic, it almost feels physical, this sense. It's experiential, it's not conceptual. Because you can, like you said, just like in emptiness, you can conceptualize all you want about this and actually convince yourself that it's true, logically even. But the feeling of it, the actual knowing experientially of it is very different. And it does have that feeling, like we said in emptiness, of revealed truth, of like, I have seen under the hood. and I was wrong about everything. Like, we're this one love. Like, there's only love. There's just this feeling, and that's that feeling that was originally generated here, and it just now is everything. And it's the substance of reality is another way that it's been experienced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you have been building ontologies out of your spiritual experiences, and you just went the way that you went, which was emptiness first, and now oneness, right? You would first have the kind of disappearance of everything. Oh, that means ultimately I see through everything. Everything is just empty, right? There's nothing is real, and then you have this awakening experience. You're like, oh no, now I see the real truth is that everything is God, right? And so people will do kinds of mental acrobatics,
gymnastics,
in order to like square these two, or they might replace one with the other, or they kind of like square the two. And this is where the process of braiding that I talk about in the model, if you're having emptiness experiences and oneness experiences, and the two start to sort of like oscillate between the two, and you're sort of like weaving them together. A lot of times people generate a philosophy that sort of supports that kind of weaving. I would say Mahayana Buddhism is a great example, right? There's emptiness and compassion. These are the two wings of the bird, the two wheels of the cart, right? You need to cultivate both equally. That Mahayana Buddhism articulates that, I think, that sort of ethos of braiding really well, or eventually integrating. They become part of the same thing. Samsara is nirvana, right? Wisdom and compassion are inseparable.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very Heart Sutra type of vibe, and the even like Satchidananda in the Hindu traditions of being consciousness bliss, like, okay, empty being as potential gives forth through this kind of love, like almost this urge to be, and it feels like love. And so in a way, it's funny, I went through this mental gymnastics process when these things started to show up and braid, like, okay, but everything's empty. And yet, like, why does it feel like total love? Like, like the beingness feels like love. And it's like, oh, emptiness can't be empty because it wants to outpour itself, and it feels like love. And so the mind is doing all these things, ontologically trying to make an explanation for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have people like, I'm going to misquote it, but Nisargadatta was said something like, I forget. It's like I know that I am everything, and I know that I'm nothing, and my life
flows between the two. Yeah,
flows between the two. It's
it's totally that
a very, very clear expression of braiding, right? There's this, and my life, unites the two together.
Totally. I think it was when I look back and I find that I'm nothing, that is wisdom. When I look ahead and I see that I am everything, that is love. And in between the two, my life flows. Yeah, that's the perfect expression of that. Yeah, perfect expression of that. My boy Nisargadatta smoking his beaties, and a lot of his followers ended up picking up smoking because they were like, well, if my boy smokes, and they ended up, getting ill. It's like, wow, humans are something. But that is the kind of expression of that love thread. Is there other things to say about the sort of end of the love thread, like the full expression of the love thread?
Yeah. Well, let me before that. So there's another territory to talk about. So this was like the heart-based, like emotional opening up to the thread. But there's another kind of opening to this thread that happens, I think, quite frequently with Advaita, at least neo-Advaita, like contemporary Western Advaita. And that is when people start out in the same practices that were, we were talking about earlier, the kind of self-inquiry practices, the pointing practices, the ones that point you past the self. When we talked earlier, that was the beginning of a deconstruction process that we then followed the kind of the thread of deconstruction down through the layers. But a lot of people will deconstruct the layer of the self and find like, awareness, right? So I've seen through Pierce, and now I see like, I thought I was just Pierce, but now I see that there's like this awareness that is aware of things. In the emptiness thread, you then turn towards the awareness and you deconstruct that. This Buddhism is very clear about deconstructing awareness right away. But but many forms of Hinduism, because they are on the oneness track instead of on the oneness thread instead of on the emptiness thread, when people in those practice frameworks have that same experience, oh, I used to think I'm pierced, but now I see that there's this awareness. I am awareness, and awareness is everything. So there's a oneness. There's an entry point into oneness that comes from seeing through the self and landing on awareness.
Yeah,
right?
and the Sufi call it the beloved. They even use the word love in that oneness, that God, that awareness. Yeah.
Yeah. So this experience, like, I am awareness, I am consciousness. Everything is consciousness. There's nothing that is not consciousness, or there's nothing that's not awareness. There's nothing that, I am awareness. There's nothing that's not awareness. Everything's made out of awareness. Everything is unfolding within this one awareness. And then how can two of us both be seeing through these eyes? We're all the same awareness, the same consciousness, right? That is seeing out through, however many billions of eyes. Those kinds of experiences now not just intellectually, but actually experientially feeling, I am this omniscient, timeless, spaceless, boundless awareness in which everything unfolds and in which all things are held. That would be a oneness thread kind of.
And yeah, again, to put a point on that, like when I first experienced that, it was the visceral knowing, like you can't even talk about it really. It's the knowing that what's looking through my eyes is looking through all eyes, and I am that. Like, that's what it feels like. And it's like, no, this is it. Like, because you can conceptually say, yeah, there's one awareness. It's like, oh no, that's it. And then that eventually deconstructed. But like, when it's felt, it's like you really think you're at the end of your understanding because there's nothing else to do, because it feels so powerful, so profound, so much like love and acceptance and total perfection. Like, of course, what's looking through my cat's eyes is what's looking through my eyes, just from a different view, and it's felt. Yeah. And that maybe that we can add that to our definition of awakening too, which is like awakening experiences, they're beyond conceptual. They're felt viscerally. They're experienced, full bodied, full being, experience. We said earlier they have this like incontrovertible quality where it's just like, I have seen the ultimate truth, right? But now you're adding to it also this other dimension, which is also actually usually there, which is, and I'm enlightened, right? There's this feeling that just like, I have seen the ultimate truth, and there's no more work to be done. Like, this is it. This is what all the scriptures were talking about. And then as SpongeBob the cartoon says, 10 seconds later, you're like, oh, wait a minute. There's something else, or that's gone now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, or you can like construct your ontology and really cling to it and sort of like get like latched on to this kind of experience and sort of, produce a whole, like you were saying, spiritual ego around it and so on and so forth. And that can be, it can be a real sort of like, you said 10 seconds later would be great. Some people, it's like 10 years later
or never later. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Great point. And you see this, I think this is one of the things that you get a little more discernment as you go through this, where you're looking at teachers and you're realizing, oh, that person is really, the flavor of their big awakening was in this thread. This is how they communicate. And they haven't really maybe deconstructed all the way down whichever other threads or their own thread. Yeah.
Let me say something about that, because I actually I want to make sure that I'm not being misheard in what I'm saying. Because I actually think that, if you think about this whole landscape of different kinds of experiences and all these different traditions that are sort of like specialists in different kinds of experiences, and then you have within the traditions, you have teachers that are even more like specialized in certain areas of those traditions. I actually think it's a beautiful thing that we have, a wide range of different kinds of experts in different parts of the territory. And so when I'm navigating this particular part of the oneness thread, there might be some teachers who spent their whole lives really, really skillfully exploring and mapping and really, really know what they're talking about in this particular location that I happen to be passing through. I don't know if I'll spend my whole life in this location myself, but having some expertise, reaching out to a teacher who really, really knows this territory would be awesome, to help me to sort of like, navigate whatever challenges or whatever, I'm going through at the moment. And then I land in some other location and I look around and there's other people who know about this location, and I can feel supported, like no matter where I am, because there's all these different people out there. The problem comes, I think, with thinking that any one of those locations is the whole thing. That's the problem.
That's
right?
it.
So
that's it.
So I like to say, when my wife's motorcycle breaks down, we don't call the plumber, right? We call the plumber when we have a plumbing problem. We call call the electrician when we have an electrical problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same thing with this territory. There are teachers who specialize in different problems in different regions of the map, and let's just be smart about who we're calling upon, when we're having certain kinds of issues, and we'll get good advice.
That beautiful. Let's put that front and center, because I think this model, Multidharma, lends itself to that understanding that you're finding specialists when you need them. So if you're having a Kundalini energy awakening, you don't go to your regular old Advaita teacher, because they'll say this is empty of anything and let it go.
Who's experiencing the Kundalini?
Who's experiencing the Kundalini, right? Can you find that? It's like, no, but there's Kundalini.
Which is fantastic advice for moving down the emptiness thread.
Absolutely.
Right? If that's your goal. So like I started off in a Theravada Buddhist framework. Theravada Buddhism, at least like the kind of the sort of super purist form that I was practicing in, it's the whole practice is deconstruction. It's see the impermanence, the non-self, and the possibility of getting entangled in suffering over absolutely anything that you experience. And so you start in the meditation, and let's say you had a Kundalini experience, right? And let's say you had this amazing oneness experience. Let's say you had, Jesus came to you and, like put a crown on your head and said, you're now like Lord of the universe. Like no matter what happens, it's just, this is temporary. This is, there's no essence here. And this is, potential snare for getting me embroiled in suffering. That's what you say to everything, no matter what.
That's right.
And so that's going to keep you on the emptiness track, right? That particular model, that particular tradition will keep you focused, hyper focused on the emptiness track.
Yeah,
and there's something to be said for that. Like if that works for you, if that it certainly does work for a lot of people. Great. If that's getting you where you need to go and where you want to go, great. There's they're going to be experts in applying the emptiness tool, right? The teachers in those traditions are going to be great if that's what you want to do. But if you want to sink in and explore this new intimacy that you have, with God, I wouldn't go there. They're not going to help with that, right? They're going to tell you it's diluted. They're going to tell you it's ignorance, right?
Yeah. Or in Zen, the term makyo, it's more illusion that you let go of. So my own experience in this has been along these lines. It's like when, the saying, right? When the student's ready, the teacher appears. When I was ready to look at emptiness, it seemed like these teachers showed up, and that's what they really, or seeing through the self, this kind of dying, the right person shows up and that's all there is. And they will even speak in a way like that is all there is. Like like you said, everything else is just delusion. Like, why are you watching this guy on YouTube talking about this? That's total nonsense. It's a dead end. It's going nowhere. So you could say, well, they're delusional, but I think the better way to say it is they're a specialist. Like you said, they're a specialist. Yeah.
And they're 100% right.
Yeah.
From that location,
from that view, from that thread,
right?
Yeah.
From that location in the thread, from that viewpoint, they are absolutely correct.
Yeah.
That that experience is Makyo, right?
Yeah.
But from a different position on a different thread, this experience might be the most desirable experience within some other tradition, right?
That's right.
So these traditions, they'll argue with each other, over essentially, ontologies or debates over which part of the territory is better than the others and so forth. Yeah. So Multidharma will just say, how about we just kind of zoom out and not argue over which position's better, it's not an attempt to construct a hierarchy. And I'm not even saying like moving down the threads is better, right?
Than not, right.
Than not, because I just think of it as an ecosystem. And I don't think, giraffes are better than flamingos.
Right.
I just think all these different creatures are adapted to whatever habitats they live in, and they each know how to eat and live in that environment. And we don't have to decide, which part of the ecosystem is better than others. We can just kind of enjoy the diversity of the whole thing.
That's right.
That's so Multidharma is kind of trying to do sort of celebrate the diversity of the landscape and don't get hung up on competition between
it seems to me like a descriptive model rather than a proscriptive model. It's not saying this is how you do things. It's saying, this is what we see. This is the diversity of experience. And it is a big container. And one thing I think is maybe worth saying at this point, which we said in the last episode, which is all the threads kind of at their conclusion, at their apex, are kind of pointing at the same the same sort of general, I don't know how to say this. There's a, how would you say this, Pierce? Help me out.
Yeah. I think, I don't want to guess what you were saying, but I think what you might have been saying is so I call it, just for shorthand, non-duality, meaning the very, very end of the thread where the subject and the object both collapse. And so people use non-duality in a lot of different ways and a lot of different positions within the thread. So maybe this is a bad word, but for me, like the ultimate non-duality, the falling away of the self or the subject and then the object happens at the bottom of all of the threads. So we talked about in the first thread, it's where, the subject who's aware of the emptiness or aware that nothing is arising, that subject falls, and then there's not even an experience of nothingness. It's just all of it disappears, right? So that's one form of kind of the collapse of subject and object. And in the oneness thread, where we're going is to a different kind of non-duality. It's arrived at from a different direction, but the subject and object collapse as well and it will happen in all four threads. And then once that collapses, then there's the letting go of the distinction between whether something's dual or non-dual. That whole distinction just ceases to matter and it just falls away. And so ultimately at the thread release, at the very end of the thread and the thread release, you see like none of this matters anyway, and it all just kind of falls away. And so maybe at that point, it sort of winds up in the same place.
Yeah. They were all provisional fabrications that get you to this no place. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So at the oneness thread, that no place it's all this love substance. There's no oneness with anything because there's only that. Is that a way to say it?
Yes. I like to say it like this. I like to say it like, where we left off was, I am awareness and awareness is everything, right? So I am awareness, or in the more kind of deistic or devotional kind of version of this, it's like, I am one with God. Like God is everything, this loving field, and I am one with that. If you're experiencing yourself as being one with that, it's implying a duality, right? Like I am experiencing a unity with this thing, then I'm not actually united with it. If I'm experiencing unity with this thing, then I'm still somehow holding something back from that in order to experience the unity. So there's like a stable, there's like a very subtle kind of stable experiencer that is experiencing the oneness, as a field of oneness or as a phenomena of oneness. So there's a subject object division there. So the full absorption into oneness would result in not being able to find oneness anymore, because you've actually like totally fully integrated into it, right? So this, again, it's this sort of, we arrive at the bottom of the thread and the thread turns out to just be meaningless, right? So I can't find oneness because there's nothing, it's not possible that anything could be other than one. So there's just no meaning to the word oneness anymore. And there's certainly not an experience of being one with anything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautifully said.
Sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That's about as well as you can say it.
Yeah.
Makes you giggle sometimes.
Yeah. And so the dropping of the thread, it's not like we go back to being separate. It's just like the whole question of whether something is one or not is just meaningless, and it just falls away. It's just no longer worth, it doesn't stand out as something to notice, and it's no longer worth really spending any time thinking about or noticing or trying to notice or trying to find.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. So that's the oneness thread. So we've done emptiness, we've done oneness. Now, dare we tackle the energy thread?
Yeah, sure.
Do you need a break, or are you good?
Do we want to take a break and have a little?
It's totally up to you.
All right. Should we can edit it out?
All right. Well, we're going to take a break and we'll be back after these messages. All right. We're back, and we're going to hit that energy thread.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Energy thread. Okay. Okay. So again, it's a whole category, right? It's traditions, it's practices, it's experiences, it's ontologies, it's identities, all sort of like, interwoven together on this thread. So energy thread is all of the traditions that really focus on kind of the energy of the body, or working with the energy of the body as the primary way of opening up to awakening and deepening into awakening. We talked about, in the previous conversation, we talked about certain things can be epiphenomenal. So you can have like epiphenomena related to energy while you're working down the emptiness thread. Let's say, I gave the example earlier in Theravada Buddhism, a lot of people experience some energy stuff happening in their meditation, but they're directed towards sort of like see the impermanent nature of the energy. And then it sort of, falls by the wayside, and it never really becomes, it never amounts to much of anything. It doesn't become a trajectory of its own. And so in that case, you could say that energy is an epiphenomena. It's not really a thread. And I'm also not talking about energy work. Like lots of people get energy work for all sorts of stuff, going to acupuncturist, or you're a Reiki practitioner or something, you're working with energy. That's not what we're talking about here. So what we're talking about here is awakening experiences, right? Like snapping out of the separate self and landing in a new kind of identity, a visceral sort of reset of reality and your identity and your worldview, landing in a place that is all about flows of energy, and then this becomes a sort of a trajectory that leads down deeper and deeper and deeper into energy experiences and culminates in some form of non-duality, or the kind of obliteration of the subject-object distinction.
So in this case, everything, well, we'll talk about as we get to the end of the thread, but like it's all just bubbling energy. There's nothing apart from that. Yeah.
Yeah. So a very common opening for the energy thread is Kundalini type experiences. So a lot of people are practicing in practice systems or in communities where that's what they're trying to do, is open their Kundalini, and are doing various kinds of yogas and other kinds of practices in order to do that. You also have within the East Asian spiritual and martial arts world, you have practices also that are talking about particularly ones that talk about the small microcosmic orbit, the kind of awakening of the body's energy, chi or ki in this case, and circulating it up and down the central channels. It's sort of a different kind of imagination of energy than you have in Indian based chakra system, but it's analogous in some ways. You're working with energies in the core of the body, in the midline of the body, in order to sort of create a driver for an awakening process. So yeah, in either case, I mean, again, it can happen suddenly, it can happen gradually. You can land, far down the thread or kind of work your way down in stages. You can yo-yo back and forth. There's all kinds of different languaging, all kinds of different experiencing. This thread is pretty brutal for people who, I mean, they all can be disorienting. They all can have their challenges. But energy thread is pretty brutal for people that have very large openings with not enough context and with, a lot of strong phenomena. I've seen people have sort of bizarre symptoms, like half the body's paralyzed, or like
physical stuff. Yeah,
migraine. Yeah, it can be migraines. Digestive stuff. A lot of neurological stuff, muscular stuff. A lot of people experience sort of like twitching and writhing and involuntary movements and so forth. With these kinds of openings, there can be kind of some long-term health issues if things aren't addressed, that can take place as well.
Yeah. It's funny. So from my experience, the first silent retreat I ever did, I was sitting day 2. I woke up at 2 a.m. With like an elephant was sitting on my chest, sort of like, as a doctor, I'm like, oh, I'm having a massive heart attack. Cool. Mm-hmm. All right. Now what do I do? Do I call 911? And I'm like, something was just telling me, no, just sit with this. And it felt like that. So I got up out of the little bed in my little dorm room, and suddenly it was just like, I was sat down. It felt like there was an energetic pull into the chair by the side of the bed. And I sat there and I closed my eyes, and there was stillness, and this massive shot of Kundalini energy. I didn't know what it was. I had no context for it at all. Came from the ground, through my body, out my chest, out the top of my head, and I was holding on for dear life. And there was a subtle resistance component because I had no effing clue what this was. And it just, but it had that feeling of, oh, I have witnessed something true. Like it had that, like this is an awakening. Like, yep. There's something there. And for the rest of the retreat, the heart was just blown open. There was energy everywhere. And no, I had no container for it. And it was a silent retreat, so I couldn't ask anybody. But that's how it showed up. And then another retreat I went, other people were jumping out of their skin, having Kundalini, locking themselves in their room because they didn't know what this was. They were writhing around. They thought they were having seizures. And a very skillful management of the staff said, this is normal Kundalini. You can ground yourself in these ways, and so on. Yeah.
I think grounding. So when, in my introductory book, The Lamp Unto Yourself, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but there's sort of some like preliminary practices, like, these are good for your health, and they're kind of your safety net. If you're going to get deeper into any kind of spiritual practices, you should have these under your belt first before you do more. And I talk about 2 different grounding practices, just because I think grounding is such an essential first aid kit for spiritual emergency type stuff that, So just knowing how to ground, knowing what grounding feels like in your body before you start doing any kind of intensive energy thread type stuff would be helpful. But like you were saying, if you're going down the emptiness, thread, you're not thinking about energy at all. You don't have any kind of context for it. Nobody's talking about it. They're not teaching it in your workshop. And suddenly you have a Kundalini, starts roaring up. It would have been better to have to have the grounding practice under your belt, but okay, now that this is happening, stop everything and go learn grounding. And it would be my advice, just because I've seen this go off the rails pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's physically and mentally disconcerting, and yeah.
So you're the doctor. I would love sometime to like hear what you think about the sort of neurophysiology of this, because just out of curiosity, because I don't know that I've explored that ontology in any detail. I mean, it is of course a materialistic ontological explanation, but I think it might be interesting to.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just give you one line on what I think, because it's hard for me to believe in any materialistic ontology, any ontology at all. But I could say that the way that we would measure things and see them, they would be more epiphenomenal correlates of what's going on. And I think in this case, there's a depolarization across the nervous system of different tracks, and it feels a certain way. It has a phenomenal quality. And those affect muscles, they affect organs, they affect the vagus, sympathetic, and parasympathetic nervous systems. And all of those affect the body, everything from, like you said, digestion to vasoactive migraines to all kinds of immune system. So it's all intertwined. And that's why this particular thread can feel very physically affecting. And so practices, like you said, like grounding and so on, can be so important. For me, the way it showed up was really funny. There was so much energy going around, and I would sit and meditate, and I'd be twitching. And anytime I would touch into that empty place, the body would light up with energy and knock me back into the body. And I was like, this is an obstruction. This is an obstruction to emptiness. But really, I think what was happening is the body was like, energy, you need to look here. You need to look here. So it just spontaneously showed up that it was happening with my wife too. And we would just kind of do like spontaneous energy practices on each other that we didn't even understand, but we found it. And then we read about chakras, and we're like, oh, there's a model. So you can actually, energy can move and ground down through the root, and then suddenly it was like, okay. Now we know. In fact, we kind of have a sense, hey, can you do the thing tonight? Because I can feel this energetic imbalance. Yeah. Physically.
Yeah. And that's an example of what I was talking about earlier about, like, if you have the map of the whole territory and like, oh, okay, there are, these practices that deal with exactly this, Qigong, certain kinds of yoga, certain kinds of other martial arts and embodied practices, deal exactly with this. They skillfully, I think what they're doing is they're first of all, they're teaching you to ground this, but then also they're teaching you to skillfully channel these kinds of experiences. Of course, there's an ontology of like an energy, as a thing that's running through your body, which would be different than, what you were talking about, the biomedical kind of interpretation might be, but it can be skillful to sort of visualize this as flows of light or flows of vapors or flows of electricity or flows of something, some kind of substance through the body, and be able to kind of visualize how to move those flows in certain ways, how to sort of, store them in different parts of your body, how to kind of like play with the resonance or the color of the light or the tactile sort of like feeling of the energy in different parts of your body, how to get skillful at sort of working with it. And that's what all of these systems are doing. They're giving you kind of like a symbolic vocabulary of and a movement kind of regimen, a movement protocol, a visualization protocol, in order to sort of, more skillfully and intentionally work with these energies, rather than just letting them sort of run roughshod all over your body and who knows what, having what effect. Yeah.
Yeah. It was funny because I started having, at some point doing intensive kind of Vipassana type meditation, I started having neck pain, this sort of chronic neck pain. I thought, is this how I'm sitting and so on? And I actually think it was quite energetic. It was an energetic phenomena, because later, it settled in different ways. And so people do, like you said, they have these physical manifestations, and they might impede their practice in some way, because they're not actually, looking at it from that standpoint.
Yeah. So all kinds of like postural stuff, cramps, like little twinges and tingles and things like that. All sorts of sort of chronic, weird stuff happening in the body as a result of meditation. And then there's sort of a spectrum from that sort of like low grade weird stuff to full on, Kundalini roaring through your body, like you were describing. So I had two kind of like major kind of Kundalini opening kind of experiences, and one of them was very, very pleasant, and one of them was pretty scary. So it can manifest. And my first one kind of did manifest in this very kind of textbook, energy moving up the spine and out the top of the head. But it was this very sort of like pleasant, bubbly, kind of champagne bubble, kind of like fizzy. Like when you pour hydrogen peroxide on something, it just kind of like fizzes, and it feels kind of like tickly, and it's just kind of moving up the head and out the top of the spine, and out the top of the head, and very pleasant. And that one was in stark contrast with the second one, which was much more violent, much more kind of like felt like my insides got ripped up out through the top of my head or through my mouth, and a much more visceral experience of like something like really like taking over my body. It felt very like dark, demonic, almost sort of entity ripping through my body, and sort of like a lot of orgasmic feeling, but also like complete terror. It was like the peak of pleasant and unpleasant at the same time. And I could just see how somebody without context, certainly that second kind of experience, somebody without context, could very easily have thought that their body was taken over by a demon or something.
Yeah. Or medically unwell, or having a stroke, or, any number of ontologies. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of prone, and it sounds like you are too, kind of prone to these more extreme or dramatic or flamboyant kinds of experiences. And, other people will experience this as very, very kind of gradual, sort of, more titrated, controlled, kind of like
subtle,
subtle kind of like opening.
Yeah.
So different kinds of experiences. But so the point here is, so the opening happens. It can be like what we've been discussing. It could maybe be something different. But the trajectory is towards more and more and more of reality becoming being seen, being experienced as energetic. And the guiding question here is what still seems solid, right? And is it really so? So initially the Kundalini is coming up through my body. And there's like, my body is separate from, the world, and the Kundalini is passing through my body. But over time, this kind of separation this kind of boundary between like my body and the inside of my body and the outside of my body kind of becomes obliterated, in this energy thread thing. It sort of all dissolves. The solidity of the body dissolves into, kind of fizzy sort of pulses or flows of energy. And then kind of the body sort of like mixes with the rest of the world into this sort of like undifferentiated swirl of, I don't know, sparkles or light or stardust or something. Different people use different metaphors, maybe. And then the senses kind of, sensory objects kind of like dissolving into that same sparkly kind of fizzy, sort of, champagne bubble kind of TV snow kind of thing. For me, the senses all became very synesthetic. Like when the vision and the hearing and the body sensations and everything sort of like became like TV snow, and it all sort of like swirled together. Then it was just like everything was mixed together. Sort of there are no objects. There's no separate channels or streams of different kinds of sensory inputs. It just, everything sort of became this buzzing, like different, undifferentiated kind of field of TV snow. You know, I don't know what.
Yeah, I've experienced exactly that. And it wasn't abiding. It was one of those like, oh, yeah, like I was just, for me, it was funny. I was just sitting in meditation, focusing on the sensations of the breath in the belly. And suddenly it was quite clear that that was just energy. And then the visual field behind the eyes was totally impermanent, like what you said, like sparkly champagne bubbles. And then all of reality became that. There was a merging of all the senses. Even thought was just, yeah.
Exactly.
And
thought kind of melts into that same synesthesia. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's funny is because I'd been intensively kind of working on a particular tradition in this emptiness thread of Zen and working on mu, the koan, it was funny that this koan of mu, like what is mu, all of it became mu. But it made no sense conceptually. It was all mooing moo. And, but it was all that energetic, just that. And it took on that flavor because that's what I had been working on. And then afterwards I couldn't make any sense of it. I was like, I don't know what that was. Yeah.
So, so some kind of like deeper experiences, you know, that you can have like in a meditation or in a practice session. And then there's like, again, maybe we should have said this from the beginning, but there are these like deep dives that you take through a practice session. You can like really fall into something really deeply, and come out of it and be like, whoa, you know, what was that? And try to make sense of it and so forth. But through the threads, there's also, I think it's more important than so I'm also prone to these huge experiences like you are, but I think it's a lot more important to pay attention to the baseline experience rather than the bells and whistles of the peak experiences that are happening in the practice. Like the baseline experience, throughout the trajectory, it's the baseline experience that keeps deepening down into the thread, right? So, so you might have a moment like what you talked about where everything just kind of like dissolves, but then it kind of like reassembles, and now you're back sort of in life, but things are a little bit less. Yeah, something's off. Things are a little bit less solid than they used to be, right? You had this experience, like had this Kundalini experience that I was talking about, you know, and that lasted for, I don't know, 40, 50 minutes, and then it was done. But everything had changed because it's like, you know, reality is like a lot less solid than it used to be, right? The baseline has shifted now, and I've seen, you know, the energetic nature of phenomena in a way that it hadn't before.
That's right. And because that experience had what we are calling maybe one of the prerequisites of a thread deepening or an experience in that way, it had a veracity, it had a truth component, like I have seen revealed truth. Because it felt like that. It was like all these things, it's like, oh, some of them less so. Some of them it's more like, oh, this is epiphenomenal. I can just tell it's just a dance of whatever. But then sometimes it's like, no. Something was shown. And so you're right. Then you come back to the baseline experience, and if you have some degree of discernment, because I think it can be very, very subtle in the baseline to notice that things are different. And this can happen over years. And what would be really cool, Pierce, is if there were an ability to kind of take a mind shot of what it's like here at the beginning and then what it's like here, and then be able to inhabit both and go, oh, there's no comparison. But we can't do that. Instead, it's like, oh, I can't even remember how it was. But it's changed.
I did a lot of writing, just personal writing, when things were happening, and like I didn't have the threads model, and I didn't have the guiding questions all planned out in this way. All of this is the kind of retrospective for me, like creating this model, but some of the same observations and some of the same ideas were already percolating, you know, at the time when this was happening. And so, you know, I think I did kind of write some things related to the guiding question when it came to the energy thread, which would be, you know, I had this experience, and now I can see that thing, you know, the visual inputs that I used to think were were very solid now seemed like they're pixelating. And then I described the pixelation of the auditory channel and how that was now sort of like fizzing a little bit. And then I described the body sensations and I described the synesthesia, because I was paying attention to what stands out as being solid, like within this kind of like dissolving, field, right? There's still some objects in that field that seem to sort of like have some solidity while everything else is fizzling and dynamic like that. So maybe an inquiry like that, just kind of paying attention to the guiding question and writing things down might help with doing the kind of tracking that you're talking about.
Beautiful, beautiful. So that's just so funny. As you were talking about that, I realized I've written things down too, and I just remembered. So this gets to, it's funny, it gets to emptiness, energy, threads simultaneously. I wrote something like after an experience in meditation that was quite profound, like that had the feel of revealed truth, like an awakening almost, like it felt like that. I said, forget about consciousness. That doesn't exist. Like reality is a foam dancing on a sea of emptiness, and all of our delusions and thoughts and story are an epiphenomenon of the construction of that foam, but it's just a foam. Yeah. And and I just remembered writing that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That seems to me like so this is also, I think, like I was doing the same thing, conceptually braiding things together, trying to make sense of these different experiences and somehow sort of braid them together. And it sounds like foam on the top of over the top of emptiness sounds to me like trying to kind of articulate the relationship between nothing exists, but yet still there's this fizzy kind of like, energetic quality to what's unfolding. And I can see both. I can see it both ways. So it sounds like to me,
that's it.
I hear everything through my model, I guess, but I can hear like the integration of those two threads in that sentence.
Yeah. See, now with this model, I can see that. Back then I was just like, this is how it seems to me. I don't know if I can put other words to it. It's like this. And it felt like truth. I was like, yeah, hell yeah. Yeah.
And foam, that's very similar to my kind of champagne bubble thing, right? The foam is just sort of like, it's not actually solid. It's all just these little bubbles that are kind of popping in and out.
They're so transient that you can't even really say they were there, and yet they were there, or were they? It's beyond like there or not there. Yeah.
So that's where this thread goes. At least that's the way I talk about this thread. It's like you go from, these really like intense energy, like kind of these qualitatively heavy sorts of energies that are moving to things becoming more and more light and more subtle, and more of the field becoming foamy or bubbly. And then there was a point for me very clearly where I really, it was like, okay, the whole field of experience is now bubbles. Are these bubbles really actually arising? Like the bubbles seem like they're solid for just like an instant. And so that was the last remaining seemingly solid thing. Everything was dynamic and bubbly, but the bubbles themselves seem to last for like a nanosecond. There seems to be solid before it pops. And so like turning towards that, is that really true? Turning towards that, then for me it was this kind of visceral realization. Oh, the bubbles don't actually arise. They pop before they arise. They're like gone before they come into existence. It can't be, they're not even bubbles. They're just the potential for bubbles. It's not energy, it's potential energy, right? It's this potentiality for things to be manifest, but nothing actually ever actually manifests.
It's so funny, Pierce, like my physiologic response to feeling truth in any time or that is laughter. And as you were talking about it, I was laughing because like, that is it. That's it. They pop before they ever were formed. And that makes no sense. And yet that's how it is. Like,
yeah.
or how it seems. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Different people may talk about this differently, have different kind of like languaging for this or whatever. But for me, I would say so that experience of just seeing the bubble pop before it forms, kind of became like so hyper focused, I guess, onto really paying attention to that it really became like the whole world, the whole universe was like in that moment, in that bubble. And so I'm like seeing the whole universe as a bubble that pops before it actually arises, right? Like all of experience is just this bubble that is never actually arising. And then I realized that, so then we're getting down to the bottom of the thread. Then I realized that there's a seemingly stable experiencer that's trying to catch the bubble before it pops. It's trying to find the bubble, right? There's a seemingly stable subject that's looking for the bubble, that's trying to pin the bubble down, right? And so that's now the last remaining solid thing is this observer that seems to be sort of, somehow present. And seeing that, then the observer also popped. and then I don't really know how to describe it other than just say it's like all of reality kind of bursting forth from nothingness, but collapsing in on itself before it actually arose, and never being able to see itself, never being able to catch itself, never being able to be pinned down. Kind of just all of reality turns out to be sort of this uncapturable, somehow dynamic, somehow like it's birth and death at the same time, but all mixed together and happening at such a speed that it can't even be seen or pinned down in any way. And seeing that, I can't make sense of it. I can't, it cannot be made sense of. It cannot be pinned down. It cannot be captured. It cannot be, it can't be, apprehended with the mind or with consciousness or with awareness. It cannot be experienced even. I mean, at first it's like amazing and you try to find it and it's all fun and, it was amazing. It was, I'm witnessing the dance of the goddess giving birth and death every moment. But eventually it's just like, oh, okay, so this is a new normal. You just acclimate to it and just, okay, reality, it just can't be pinned down. It just cannot be seen. It cannot be witnessed. It cannot be experienced. So let it go. Let that thread go. Like that thread has been seen to the end. There's nothing more to do about it. What are we going to do about it?
What are you going to do?
Capture it. We can't capture it. We can't keep looking for it. We can't, it just becomes nonsensical.
Yeah.
The thread can be dropped.
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's not dropped because things stop being energetic.
No.
It's just dropped because the distinction between is this energetic or not, or what? How can I make the distinction between that? It just doesn't make sense anymore.
Well, once that is fully inhabited in a sense, and I don't know what that means, but you really know that's known. It's like, this is how it is. It's like, wow, why are we trying to make sense of this? Like, why are we trying to talk about this?
The absurdity of trying to make sense of it. The absurdity
Cosmic
of trying
joke.
to talk about it. The absurdity of trying to even find it. It can be.
And what's even more beautiful is that all that foam that epiphenomenally creates a world can create a world where we can fluidly, you and I, do a show about it, because what else is there to do? It's fantastic. By the way, when you were talking about that, something popped in my head that my friend Angelo DeLullo wrote in his book when he has a chapter called Stages of Awakening, which he says the same thing. Like, this is one map, blah, blah, blah. But he says at the end of it, that last line of the whole thread was birth and death are butterflies dancing around the flower of indeterminacy. I was
Sure.
like, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's the best.
If I read that, like I'm always like I said before, I'm always like seeing things through these threads. If I read that, I would say, yeah, that's that. I would imagine we're talking about the same thing. Now, whether that for him came out of a whole trajectory
Emptiness.
of energy or what,
Right.
is a different question. Because like I was saying before, like the things, well, by the time we get to the ends of the threads, for most people that I've met, that I've talked to, myself included, like for most people, by the time you're getting to the end of the threads, these threads are getting really blended together, and so the languaging that you're using, can mix together different threads, different kinds of experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow, what a ride. That was fun. Woo! It's all bubbly. It's funny when, even when we talk about this stuff, it's not like it all disappears. Like you said, like I can feel the energy in the body. I can feel the dancing aliveness of it. And when we're talking at the end of the thread, it's like, yeah, there's nothing happening in that sense. And you can feel that, but it's so ordinary. It's like, what are you really going to make about it at the end of it?
Right. Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess we have now, we saved the most complicated, most misunderstood thread for the very end.
I don't mean to overstay my welcome, but it's possible we could do a whole show just on the Psyche thread because this thread is I'm doing something different with this thread. I recognize that I'm thinking about things or presenting things in a way that's unusual, that might need more, that could potentially be interesting to unpack more.
Should we?
In more detail.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let's do this, Pierce, because I feel this truly like this is the central thing. Like this is such an important, misunderstood, underdiagnosed, and under-talked about realm of this that I do want to do. If you're game to come back, let's do a whole show on the Psyche thread, but let's maybe touch on it a little bit again
today,
here.
like we've done the other ones, but then
exactly, exactly, and it might include some spiritual crisis stuff. But if not, maybe that's another episode too. But let's go ahead. Yeah.
I think that's good. So that I don't have to try to hit every detail with this
because it's impossible. Yeah.
So people can, I think, maybe hopefully listen to the first conversation that we had to get a feel for this thread on the whole. I'm pulling together a lot of traditions into this thread that actually frame things quite differently from one another. So previously I was also pulling together different traditions into these threads, and a lot of them have very different language from one another, but the language tends to be similar. Like in the case of Christian mysticism, they talk about oneness with God, and then in Hinduism they talk about oneness, other terms like Brahman or whatever, but they're ultimately they're using the same sort of words like oneness. When it comes to the Psyche thread, it's like the whole framework, the whole paradigm, the whole ontology is radically different between these traditions, and so I'm gonna lump things together that on their face might not seem like they go together, but in my model they do, because the Psyche thread is about an awakening experience where you realize that previously I thought I was Pierce. Now what I realize is that Pierce is just part of a larger kind of whole of who I am. So there's a larger whole, an entity that is Pierce. It is not oneness. Everything is one. Pierce is a distinct being, a distinct entity, but Pierce is more multidimensional than I previously thought I was. And actually, with the trajectory of this thread is I realized that more and more and more of who I thought Pierce was is actually being controlled by these other parts, the previously unseen, previously unknown parts of Pierce. So I'm saying it in a generic way, trying to capture, a lot of different traditions. So and there's some forms of psychology where, like IFS, for example, where Pierce is a part, but there's, or the ego is a part, but then all these other parts that hijack the the system and that come forward to speak their truths and so forth. So that would be like an example of this kind of thing. But there's also forms of shamanism that talk about different souls or spirits that move to the, to the foreground. Like I am this collection of souls and spirits and different kinds of entities. Some people, subscribe to a belief system where you're an astral being that was reborn on this earth, to play out some kind of mission, and so you're awakening to your true identity as this, I don't know, star being that is, and you're awakening to your mission on earth that you previously was unconscious, that now you're bringing into consciousness. Lots of other examples, so lots of different ways that people can have this kind of psyche thread awakening. And again, I'm just choosing one word to call these threads. It's just an arbitrary name. But what I'm going for here is like the awakening of the whole, of the unconscious parts of the psyche, and the coming forward into awareness and into being able to express themselves and be recognized and be seen as part of the whole.
So in a sense, you could say it's and other words for this might be a conditioning thread, an unconscious thread, a causes and conditions thread that are unseen or unwelcomed, and eventually come into awareness. I might, if I'm braiding threads, I might say what I wrote earlier about everything is a foam on emptiness that somehow epiphenomenally spins up a world and a story and a history and a personality. I could say this is that epiphenomenal spinning up, and how it's causes and conditions that are deep and unseen often, that create this sense of me and my behavior and my personality. Just thoughts that popped in my head.
Yeah. So again, like from the integrated standpoint, there's no difference. Like if you're totally integrated, you look at these four threads and you're like, Pierce, there's no difference. Like emptiness is oneness, and it is energetic, and it's all being produced by unconsciously through conditioning and by the mind, right? That's an integrated perspective that's saying that, right?
Right.
So I'm separating them out to talk about sort of traditions that dedicate themselves to awakening through a particular one particular way of seeing versus another. And so in this particular thread, like, systems like Jungian psychology, like, IFS, like certain forms of shamanism and so on and so forth, they wouldn't subscribe to an emptiness perspective, or they may not subscribe to an energy perspective. That they see it from this perspective, that entree into awakening is through this perspective. This perspective deepens and deepens and deepens. But then for a lot of people, it's going to wind up, other threads are going to open, and they're going to wind up kind of intertwining together. And people will wind up seeing some connections between these threads, and seeing, oh yeah, this is the all reality is a virtual reality display. It's a projection. And now I see that the origin of the projection is all of the contents of, my unconscious, or something like that. They'll be able to sort of like fit it all together. So the ultimate realization here on this thread is that, every last shred of reality is a projection of the unconscious parts of the psyche. So the other threads, all the threads wind up with kind of all of reality being seen as this thread. So all of reality seen as empty, is disappearing, or all of reality is seen as being totally unified, or all reality is seen as being, potential energy that never actually manifests. And here it's all reality seen as projection of the psyche, as projection of the unconscious parts of the mind. Every moment being co-constructed, every moment being, manifested, built on the fly, rendered on the fly, by your conditioning, by your personal conditioning, psychological conditioning, but then deeper by your ancestral, your genetic, your could be past lives, could be astral, it could be all sorts of ontologies that are created to, explain conditioning. I like to get into the kind of the mammalian conditioning, the biological being, the kind of the material conditioning, the ways that our realities are constructed by our, by our animal nature.
The social aspect, the hierarchical aspect.
Social, cultural, and just peeling back the onion, more and more and more of these layers of conditioning, and just seeing how every last thing that I think, see, do, perceive, etc., is structured by these things. Like even at the most fundamental level, the reality that I inhabit just is inhabited differently than it would be if I were a snail, right? I mean, I would have a completely different, experience of reality, right? So it's very, very fundamental. But again, not just intellectual, but actually visceral realization of that, and a sort of experiential, phenomenological sort of like we've been saying, an experience of, I've seen ultimate reality.
I know truth.
I know truth, and this is an enlightened sort of awakened state.
And I have to say, like, people who discount this thread, which is natural because so many of the traditions, especially in the East, don't. This is like a side effect thread that you try to want to push out of the way to get back to the main business of emptiness or energy or oneness. My wife basically had her first awakening through this thread. And it was a seeing that she was this collection of personality traits that was conditioned, and it was almost predictable using like a dumb model like the Enneagram. And then to have something catastrophically highlight that caused a collapse of identity down through the threads to realize, the whole identity is constructed from this unconscious stuff. Yeah. So who the hell am I? And that was the big shift. And it was experiential. It was visceral. It was emotional. It was physical. It wasn't conceptual.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a great like capsule summary of a Psyche Thread awakening. The language you chose there was more on the psychology end of things.
That's right.
Like if you were to repeat that story, but to insert words like soul and spirit and underworld and so forth, that would also be a way of talking about this. You could repeat that and say, astral plane, star beings, etc., and that would be another way of languaging the same thing. But the core of it is exactly what you said: an awakening to how much of this identity is being produced by these previously unconscious materials, and then as the thread deepens, those unconscious parts come up to be seen, to be recognized, to be welcomed, and also to be kind of like invited to operate autonomously without needing to be controlled or denied or feared. Right. So the unconscious processes that previously have been sort of like tucked away and ignored in the shadow, right, can come out and just like, first of all, to be healed, because often there is a healing in the allowing these parts to come out from the shadow and be recognized. They're just in the seeing of them, there's often a healing that takes place. So a lot of it is to be healed. But you're right. I kind of object to the traditional way of talking about karma, or talking about these kleshas and so forth as things that are things that need to be purified, that need to be gotten rid of. Because I actually, in my own opinion, don't feel that becoming a sort of superhuman, non-human, perfected being that that has totally transcended its humanity. I don't really take that on as a desirable goal. I think the purpose of the Psyche Thread anyway is to fully become human, to fully embody all of these different aspects of our conditioning, and to allow them to be free to express themselves, rather than deconditioning them out of the being. I think we talked about this last time.
We did to a degree. Yeah, we did to a degree. And so one of the pieces of this that I think comes up is when the conditioning is seen fully and welcomed and accepted and allowed to be, there can be a feeling, I think, that, oh, this is unsafe. This is unsafe because this is a dark part of me, or this is an unwanted part. And it's that feeling of darkness, unwanted, that is the pushing and the resistance on the part that doesn't welcome. My experience is when those parts are welcomed fully, there may be an adjustment period where there's a little bit, because the guardrails on the conditioning are taken off, where the conditioning does express itself in ways that might seem a little, ooh, what's he doing? Like he started drinking when he hasn't drank before, or, some crazy stuff can happen. But it often settles down to where, instead of acting unconsciously and controlling behavior in a way that's not clear and comes out in these, whether passive aggressive or aggressive ways, instead it's like, oh yeah, this is a part of Zubin that shows up, and it's actually welcome. It's okay. And by being welcome, it's like, this is an analogy that came up since the last time we spoke, Pearson. I know you gave this great analogy about the bionic arm and stuff. So now here's my analogy. So in quantum physics, there's this idea of Heisenberg uncertainty and the observer effect. So when you look at something, it actually changes its configuration. So just the act of observing changes it. So just the act of making conscious and unconscious part of our conditioning actually subtly modifies it. So it's no longer doing things the same way. It actually changes the conditioning. And that in itself can be a kind of healing. It can heal these parts that were acting because they weren't seen. They were in a certain configuration that was very maybe maladaptive to your current way of being in the world. Is that your experience, or?
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's well said. So just the act of recognizing and allowing the part to be there and welcoming it, even. I mean, that's even welcoming it and loving it. That's even more powerful if you can see, oh, this conditioned part of, myself that I previously was unaware of, is here because of, whatever past events or past life events or, hereditary features or whatever. And it is an integral part of who I am, and I welcome this part to come forward and be part of the whole. And I will even love it as a part of the whole. Just that alone, I think, solves, I don't know, 90%, 99%. I don't know.
It's a high percentage. It's a high percentage. Yeah. And it's kind of what they do in like emotion circling groups, like Inside Circle and these things I've had experience with, where these parts are fully loved into acceptance. Yeah. In a sense, it's almost like an integration with the oneness thread to some degree. It's like they're all made of this love. It can be felt that way sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the difference is before integration, when the threads are separate, the difference here is that what I'm doing is uncovering the deeper parts of me, right? I'm not transcending me to connect with everything else. There's a kind of interiority to this, that I'm finding me here. Eventually, of course, you discover that by trying to find me, you wind up finding everything, right? Instead of going out to find everything, you go in.
It's all right here.
You just include more and more and more of this conditioning, and ultimately find that you've just included absolutely every last shred of experience of the universe. It's all, who you are. Shoot, I was going to say something, but now I just dropped it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking the word unconditional love comes to mind. Like you look inside and you realize all these parts are there because of cause and conditions, well intertwined with everything. And then, like you said, the entire universe makes up you. So you look inside and you find everything.
Yeah.
Every single piece. Yeah.
So how you're going to work through this is going to look really different depending on how you have conceptualized it, right? So, it sounds like your wife's version of this kind of Psyche Thread awakening might have been well supported by some kind of therapy, particular, Jungian therapy, IFS type stuff, other forms of therapy that are about like bringing up parts and giving them the space to be able to speak and interact with them and so forth. But it through a different framework could have been just as skillful to do shamanic journeying, let's say, going down into this is how I did a lot of this work, was going, down into kind of like an imaginal underworld, finding different beings living in the underworld and engaging with them in certain ways, asking them to come up into the body and asking them to speak through the body, and engaging with them as entities, as separate entities, engaging with them, inviting them to speak, inviting them to inhabit the body, inviting them to, speak their truth, doing rituals for them, giving offerings to them and so forth, in a more sort of like, shamanic or indigenous style tradition, I think is just as effective for some people, right? So that'll work better for some people than the psychology kind of framing, but they both can be quite powerful, quite effective.
And we should say, because I mean, that's beautiful actually, like, because that process it's really effectively no different. It's just a totally different, but in a sense, it's totally different. But it's the same sort of discovery process. This was in the absence of any psychedelics or plant medicine that these things arose for you, right, Pierce?
Oh yeah. So so like I said earlier, I never did any kind of psychedelics as part of this awakening process. I mean, unless you want to count like heavy dose meditation as a psychedelic, which
that's pretty much
I think you could.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, at a certain so for me and for I think I think for many people, these threads, once they're opened through some kind of whatever technique, whatever practice you've opened the threads with, they kind of then, at a certain point, if you're doing that practice with enough intensity, with enough kind of dedication, with enough dosage, right? At a certain point, I think if it's a thread and you've actually opened the thread, at a certain point, it kind of takes on a life of its own, in my experience, and it sort of starts driving you or beckoning you or drawing you in, as opposed to you having to draw out these experiences. So there was a kind of an opening experience, and then sort of I just got sucked down into this whole thing, and it was like, okay, this is what is being demanded at this point in time. This is the main event. This is what I'm focusing on. I still was doing some emptiness and energy and oneness type practices just to keep kind of the momentum on all four threads. But this thread kind of like came into the foreground and became kind of the main thing for a couple of years, actually. So this is what I call braiding, right? Like one thread at a time coming to the fourth, and this one came forward, and it was like, okay, we put the other stuff on hold because this is the main event. But then, like I was saying earlier, the threads started to go from braiding sort of one at a time to then like integrating together. Once I had all four threads open, they started integrating together, and these kind of realizations and experiences, frameworks, viewpoints started to blend together as they deepened.
And so this piece that arose for you over 2 years, where entities are coming and they're being welcomed and you're talking to them, if you didn't have a container for this, and you were not somebody who studied indigenous practices or any of that, I mean, like in your conditioning, you are, Latino, you're of a South American ancestry. Are you Colombian?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of baked.
Part Colombian, yeah.
Oh, got it. So it's kind of baked in, but at the same time, it's not like you had a long tradition of this personally. Did you feel at some point like you were going crazy?
Yeah. So my heritage is 3/4 Latino, like, so it's 1/4 Colombian and half Uruguayan. And so this it was interesting to me that this kind of experience that I'm talking about, the Psyche Thread experience, when that opened up, because my whole life I never really explored the spiritual traditions of of my heritage culture. I never was Christian. My family's atheist or agnostic. Never got into. I might have read a couple of books at some point on South American indigenous religious practices, but never got into any of that practice myself. But when this Psyche Thread stuff started happening, a lot of it had this sort of like Catholic and indigenous Colombian kind of tinge to it. My grandfather is half indigenous, so I think this was coming from maybe from an ancestral. I mean, it felt like it was coming from an ancestral kind of place, where a lot of the symbolism, a lot of the kinds of entities, the way they looked, and sort of it had that flavor to it. But I had, as somebody who's spent my whole life studying religions and reading all kinds of stuff, I had read tons about indigenous spirit practices more generally. I'd had a lot of experience in Thailand with some Asian versions of this type of stuff. Even when I was younger, I was into some Native American kind of sweat lodge type practices, and so I had enough context that even though the symbolism was new, the kind of the underlying idea was familiar enough that I saw that and was like, okay, yeah, good chance I'm going crazy. Yes. But this also scans, right, in terms of what I know about indigenous practices. And at this point I'd already had a bunch of weird like Kundalini stuff and a bunch of other weird experiences. I was like, okay, this is probably just like part of the next unfolding here. But one thing that was important for me that I do feel like is worth mentioning is I had this I set up for myself like a barometer of like, how will I know if I am going off the rails? And what I decided was the first person to know would be my wife. And so I recruited her to be kind of like the barometer, the flashing red light alarm. If I started to seem like I was, losing it, like I asked her to tell me, and I said, I will trust you, and I will, and you can intervene. And please do. But what I saw was that in my external life, what was happening downstairs in my practice space, in the dark on my own, is one thing. That was really weird. But what was happening in daily life was just like, my relationships were feeling so much like cleaner and so much more connected, and I was feeling so much more present in my family and my work life and everything, that it just seemed like the results I was seeing in the conventional world were showing me that this work was a good thing and it wasn't maladaptive. And I think that's actually the line. I think it actually is the line that is used in psychiatric diagnostics. I think it is actually an important line, between whether these kinds of experiences are leading to, more adaptive or maladaptive kinds of behaviors. I don't think I don't think you're going crazy if you're, thinking weird shit in the basement while you're doing your meditation practice, right? It's how you're interacting.
Yeah.
You're
still able to work.
Family
you're functional. It's like an alcoholic, when it starts interfering with your actual life and your relationships, then it's a pathologic diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I'm not a medical professional, so nobody listening should take any medical advice from me.
Or me for that matter, even though I am one. I would say this though, like one of my experiences is sometimes doing this work, when this work arises, reactivity, underlying repressed stuff can show up in relationships and can actually seem like things have gotten worse. But
Yeah.
in all honesty, what's happening is there's an authenticity showing up where things that had been hidden or pushed away are now coming to the surface and are being addressed, and that can feel very turbulent. And so my own experience is that does tend to happen, and then it tends to settle out and actually then you achieve that, oh wow, there's much more presence, there's much more acceptance,
Yeah.
there's a feeling of
Yeah.
love. Yeah.
Yeah. There definitely was that, exactly what you're saying. There definitely was like the kind of the grit in the process. I called it the detangling process. You know, the way it felt was like a lot of relationships were snarled up, had some tangles, and they need to be detangled. But of course, anybody who's ever tried to detangle a shoelace or something knows that like sometimes you got to like make more of a mess before you can you can get all the knots out, right? So it wasn't, it's not pretty. This work is not, Psyche Thread work is not pretty. It's not linear in any fashion. It's not it's not rainbows and ponies. It's dark and it's messy and it's difficult. It's difficult work.
There's a Peter Gabriel song called "Digging in the Dirt," and it has a video, and it really encapsulates this for me. You know, digging in the dirt, find the places we got hurt, and the whole thing is it's like he's diving into his psyche, and the imagery in the video is going underground. Yeah. You know, it is gritty stuff.
It felt underground. It felt underworldly to me. A lot of the imagery, a lot of the kind of the sensations, a lot of the work felt very like excavating stuff in the mud. Yeah, it felt
beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. It's actually, it becomes very delicious after a point because you see the benefits and you see that you want to welcome, you lean into it more. But at first it's like, I don't want anything to do with this. This is uncomfortable. It can be very scary. Yeah. For some.
Yeah. No, yeah. I think so. And and I've talked to people who, for them, maybe a similar distinction that we made earlier when talking about the energy thread between energy work and energy thread awakenings. And I think there's something to be said here too between psyche thread awakening versus just like therapy. So, a lot of people as part of an awakening process hit this material and they seek help from various types of therapists, and that's more kind of analogous to energy work, right? You have a bunch of weird stuff happen in your awakening process and you go get some acupuncture, and that's very, very helpful. And I think everybody should do that personally. Get help with whatever junk is coming up while you're in an awakening process through skillful therapy work. I think is brilliant. I think we should all be doing that. But this is something different. This is a sustained engagement with a different kind of identity and a different kind of reality that is emerging from the unconscious material in your psyche, and it can be facilitated by a psychologist, by a therapist. From a Western perspective, it can be facilitated by shamanic work, probably hallucinogenic work, probably, all sorts of other stuff. But it's different because you're not focused on cleaning up the ego to be more functional. You're focused,
right.
You're focused on the birth of a new identity, the birth of a new self, the birth of a different kind of self.
Yeah, an acceptance of all that. So let me say one thing, because I think this has been my experience. People talk about psychedelics as all kinds of tools for all kinds of stuff and so on and so forth. My limited experience with psychedelics, and it's limited and not limited. I've done all the powerful psychedelics. I've done those things. I've made videos about it. But it's not like it's been going on for all my life. It's only really more recently that has arisen. My experience with those is they are, yeah, you can get some insights into emptiness. You can get insights into unity thread for sure. Insights into energy thread a little bit for me. But it was the psyche thread where these were the most powerful tools, because, like, for example, 5-MeO-DMT will will drop me right into the body where I feel past traumas or I feel something held, and it will show you, in a sense, this is how it feels. Kind of the way you were speaking with entities and they're showing you little parts of you, in a sense. It was showing me, okay, yeah, this part of you, has not been accepted. You haven't welcomed this, and it's causing havoc, and this is what it feels like. And you can feel emotional, energetic aspects of these entities in that way. And for me, that was the power of those medicines. Even psilocybin would do that. It was like, oh, there was this childhood thing where you were sick and you can feel it again embodied in that way, and allow it. And it's not with the goal of polishing your ego. I think people sometimes use psychedelics like, I'm going to take the rough edges off my ego, and it doesn't work. It's more like, okay, well, let's see what needs to be seen. And even setting the attention, I want this thing to show me what I'm not seeing, what I'm not welcoming, what I'm not allowing. So they can be a powerful tool, in my opinion, my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I don't have that experience, but I recognize what you're talking about. I hear it. It seems like we're talking about the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just put that on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then, I was going to say one more thing, which is just the key here, the kind of the guiding question, right? And according to my model, there's a guiding question for each one. I forget exactly how I put it in the book, but it's essentially like what here hasn't been welcomed, what here is being, held at an arm's length, what here is being denied, what here within this, reality is not being accepted. And then there's a sort of a turning towards that. And really for me, that like the verb for this, if the emptiness thread is to deconstruct, and the oneness thread is to unify, and the energy thread is to dissolve, like this one is to surrender. For me, that's like super, super clear that
yes,
that it's these things. It's the act of pushing them down into the shadows. It's the act of rejecting them. It's the act of, denying them that is causing the problems. That's causing all of the tensions and all of the unskillful, maladaptive behavior and so forth. And why are you pushing it down? Why are you keeping it at arm's length? Why are you pushing it away? Is always because it can't be tolerated. It can't be. This cannot be welcome. This cannot be true. This cannot be here. It has to be removed because I reject it. And so for me, there's like an act of just radical surrender. Radical surrender to everything that comes up. Yes, you too. Yes, demons. Yes, you too. Sadness. Yes, you too. Trauma. Yes, you too. All these embarrassing things that I wish weren't true about myself. Yes, you too. Every single shadow. Yes, you too. I surrender. Yes, you could be here. Yes, you could be here.
That's perfectly said. In a sense, it's almost like, again, since all the threads converge on this non-dual sort of substratum that isn't a substratum, here for me, it feels like at the core of our assumed identity is a sense of control, is a sense of, I can do something about reality. I have a separate will and I can do it. And when it's realized in this thread that you have been a puppet dancing on the strings of causes and conditions and conditioning, the act of surrender almost becomes involuntary, and then it becomes self, like a snowball. It's like, yep, this too. And that's where like this is where I think psychedelics are interesting, because if you go in with a psychedelic, and a lot of people do, trying to push and pull and have an outcome, that's what will color the experience. But a true surrender, a true attitude of surrender will show you those things, and it just spirals. It's like, okay, yeah, surrender this too. Yeah, I'm an asshole in so many ways because of conditioning, and that too is okay. That's welcome. And just the act of seeing that takes the edges and changes it. Like we were saying earlier, it's like a Heisenberg uncertainty. I've observed it. Now its velocity and position are different, and it just progressive expansion of welcoming drops the sense of control. And once that control drops, it's like, ooh, then you're in the unknown firmly. You're at the end of the emptiness thread, the end of the oneness thread, the end of the energy thread. There's no control in anything there. And it's the same with psyche. Yeah.
Yeah. So right. So this is really well said, and this is the end. The non-dual end of this thread, right? Is to realize. So having done all of this welcoming, all of this surrendering to one thing after another, after another, after another, I don't actually think you need to get through like every last aspect of conditioning. I don't actually think it's possible. I think there's just
It's
like
not
way
possible.
too much of it. You
I
can't
agree.
see it all.
Yeah.
You can't see it all, but the more you see, the more you surrender, the more you accept it. I think you come to the point where you see that that I feel like I'm here welcoming and accepting these things to be as they are, right? So there's still like this subject that's kind of like having an attitude or a relationship with these objects that are coming up. And the important realization at the bottom of the Psyche thread is to see that this like observing, welcoming, controlling self, the one that thinks it's in control, is itself just a conditioned thing, right? The impulse to welcome, the impulse to have a stance on reality, that impulse to control reality, to see reality, to relate to reality, to want to judge or manage reality, that manager, that itself is no different than the conditioning. And at that point, then the whole thing collapses, and it's like, where is there anything not conditioned here? Like there's nothing that's not conditioning. The whole thing is conditioning. And then at that point, so I call this sort of like, the autopilot sort of kicks in, which is like, okay, well, if there's no manager managing all of this conditioning to come up and dictate, control like what reality is like, then reality experience just kind of unfolds on its own without that pilot. It just kind of like the guardrails come off, and then just the conditioning can just run freely. Everything is conditioning. There is no manager to manage it. It's kind of like just the whole thing just operates autonomously, without any center or any illusion of there being a center or a controller. And then at that point, the distinction between what's conditioned and what's not conditioned, what's welcomed, what's not welcomed, none of that really makes any more sense. The distinction between what's controlling and what's being controlled no longer makes any sense. And so the whole thread can also be dropped. It doesn't mean that you're finished with conditioning. The conditioning isn't there. It's the opposite. Conditioning now is like, that's all that there is.
The whole thing,
right?
The whole thing.
Yeah. So it's so that the distinction between conditioning and non-conditioning just is meaningless. The whole thing can be dropped, and the thread's work is done. Not to say that there won't be conditioning that comes up later, that some trauma won't resurface, or some other, bad habit might come up. But it just will come up, and it won't be feared and denied, and a self created out of it, an ontology, and a whole sort of worldview, and a whole sort of control mechanism and management mechanism, won't need to arise when conditioning comes up. It'll just be conditioning comes up. It can be seen, it can be acted on, it can be processed, it can be worked with, without all the convoluted sort of like machinations of self and control and so forth.
That's what it is. The pushing and pulling of a one who could do otherwise seems to relax, and there's just the play playing it out. And in a sense, you could say there's radical authenticity, because you are exactly what your conditioning is making you, without this push and pull. But even that, it's a strange way of speaking, because even the pushing and pulling was seen as the result of conditioning, like you said. Yeah. The one who could do otherwise was a conditioned response, and maybe it relaxes by seeing what it was. And that itself is enough to make the feel of it much less frictional. Yeah.
You said the word authenticity, and so it reminded me, I have a friend who described this. Maybe this is a helpful metaphor, maybe not, but he said, it's imagine somebody told you, you should be more authentic, or you had the thought like, I should be more authentic. And so then you started practicing being authentic. You started practicing authenticity in order to improve your authenticity. And you start like, monitoring your behavior to see like, oh, here I was authentic and here I wasn't authentic, and so on and so forth. Like, you will never achieve authenticity
Right.
through that pathway, right? It will always be some kind of convoluted pseudo authenticity. But eventually somewhere you can find where by practicing authenticity more and more and more, something improves in the way that the system works, things get more fluid, and eventually the idea that I have to be more authentic falls away, and the organism can just do what it does without thinking about whether or not it's being authentic. I don't know if that's helpful, but there's something like that going on with the Psyche Thread. It's like I'm going through and I'm doing this practice to welcome all these parts, all these beings, all these entities, all these parts of myself to be authentic, to be autonomous, to just, be free to express themselves. But the whole time I'm managing it. Like, yes, you are welcome. Yes, you are welcome. Yes, you're welcome too. Like, you can come up, right?
I'm welcoming you.
Yeah, orchestrating
exactly.
it like the orchestra, like the maestro at the orchestra, right? And then eventually, this what I call the pilot, sort of like has to step down, or the maestro has to step down, and these parts can just be free to do their thing without being orchestrated in that way. And only then do you actually have authenticity, right? Only then do you actually have like the full autonomy of all these conditioned parts to just do their thing.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah, in a sense, it goes back to what we were saying in the early parts about the other threads. You have this raft that's necessary to get you to from A to B, and you need like a river Styx guy that drives the raft, and the raft itself is a construct in that thread of whatever the question is. But ultimately, the raft is seen as, okay, now we can sink that now. We got to the other side. The understanding's there. The raft is seen as kind of, why would I have that? And the driver of the raft disappears, basically drowned in the journey. And then there's just the realization. It's like, oh yeah. And
so some people abandon the raft, like you just said, but some people, I feel like the raft kind of pops and sort of like sinks out from under their feet, right?
That's more common. If I feel like,
I do too. It's like just the practices stop working, and they stop working. Spirituality starts falling away, and it's just like you're left just without the raft anymore, and things are just kind of.
One of the remarkable, this is my experience, the ability to see what's going on at that stage is limited. Like for me, because the raft pops out and it's like, why doesn't this work anymore? Why am I not interested in that? Why does this seem silly? Why does all spirituality seem dumb? Like, why are we talking about this? Why are we even using the word spirituality? What are these practices? It almost feels like you've gotten cynical, you've failed in some way, you've fallen back asleep, if that's possible, like all of that. But then the actual lived experience is like, oh, this is just totally fine. The lifing. I don't understand. And then when it's pointed to you, like actually you were the one who pointed this out. This is the first time I realized it when you were talking about it. I was like, oh, that raft just wasn't necessary anymore. Like it served its part. It's gone. It's all integrated. It's like, I don't need it. And then that's not to say that shit doesn't arise. Like you said, like in the conditioning thread, especially, oh my God, like stuff still comes up and I'm like, oh, I'm a total asshole because of this thing that wasn't seen. And that's fine. I can sit with that now, and it shows up, and different aspects of even different punch throughs of different threads still kind of show up, and they're like, hey, remember this? Like, oh wait, yeah, this is a little piece. But it's much more, it's just kind of very much a part of life. It's very integrated with that fifth thread, which is just the gross reality of taking kids to school and paying your bills and so on.
Yeah. So I said at the end of each one of the thread, you drop the thread. It's not like things become unempty. It's not like things become unified. It's not like things become unenergetic, right? And so here it's not like, it's not like conditioning, just totally disappears. It's not like, things become unconditioned. It's just there isn't so much need to track it all and pay attention to it and work with it and have viewpoints about it and have, identify with it and have ontologies about it and have systems about it and have arguments about it. And,
it just seems,
it just can some people don't like, some of my friends don't like me to talk about autopilot. So that might be a bad metaphor, but it's the one that I usually reach for. It's just like everything just goes on autopilot and it just kind of like it just kind of like works and does its thing. And there isn't really a need to really ruminate about all of this stuff or any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So
it's a nice sigh of, okay. But you don't escape. This is the thing. Like there's this feeling in spiritual circles that you're somehow transcending, avoiding, or better than. Nope. You're right back into lifing itself, and you are fully human. That's what it feels like.
And I prefer, some people like to use what I think are rather elevated language to talk about the release of the threads as like, oh, you're liberated, or it's this, that, or the other. I mean, for me, I actually prefer to go the other way around. I don't remember if I said this last time, but I prefer to go the other way around and use like unattractive language to talk about this. So I don't mind saying like, first you're asleep, then you have this whole awakening experience, and then you just go back to sleep. It's perfectly fine to I think it's probably more healthy to think about it that way. So, the whole awakening process is about extracting yourself out of that identification with the narrative self, the separate self, and you go through all of these other kinds of like processes of realization and so on and so forth. And then at the end, then it's just like, okay, like that whole thing can be like, oh, it's not like you go back to being fused with the separate self. I don't mean that by going back to sleep. It's just like the whole kind of like apparatus of awakening and all the kind of experiences and all the kind of energy and attention and focus that you had on that can just be let go of, and you can just, go back to like they say in Zen, which is, I guess, your tradition, like chop wood, carry water, right? Or mountains are mountains again, right? Like, I think that we have the pointers in Zen, to this thing that we're talking about here. It's just the whole sort of apparatus of spirituality falls away, and it's just like, okay, just get on with it.
Yep. Right back. And, but in many ways, what were you gonna say? Sorry.
I was just gonna say, but just to reiterate something I said earlier, in my model of Multidharma anyway, this is not a hierarchy. I'm not saying that people who drop the threads are better than people who are in the threads. I actually think it's probably, the world would probably be a better place if we had more people that were like deeply embedded into the certain positions in the threads than if, like in terms of, the power of certain teachings and certain kinds of experiences to like wake people up and pull them out of their, their deep
mind identification,
embeddedness and identification with suffering and so forth. And I just feel like people who are in certain positions in the threads have just absolutely critical teachings. And I in no way think of people who have dropped the threads as being better than people who are holding the threads in any way. It's just a map of the territory and showing another, like the savanna's over here, the mountains are over there, there's a swamp over here, and oh, by the way, there's a forest over here, and none of them are better than the other. It's just different habitats where different beings live.
Yeah. It's nice to have the bodhisattvas scattered everywhere at different stages that can show up for you when you need it, The other thing I was just going to say, that's beautifully said. I think in many ways, this is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. It can really feel like that. And the classic hero's journey is you're there in your normal mind identification. The call to adventure is called. You often refuse it, but then there's awakening. Then you go through all of these different threads unraveling, and the Psyche Thread and going to the underworld, and all of it in many ways is the hero's journey. But the atonement with the Father, the reconciliation with your conditioning, with everything being empty, there's no self. The end of the hero's journey is you come right back home and you share the gift that you have. And the way that might share in an integrated way is just simply to live life as authentically as naturally happens. So it feels like that. It feels like Campbell was just looking at an archetype there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know about you, but I get frequently asked, well, so if you've dropped all the threads, then why are you writing a
Talking.
book about the threads? Why are you
Yeah.
talking about
You just said there's nothing
threads?
to talk
What's,
about. Right.
there's nothing to talk about. Why are you actually
Right.
talking about this? And part of that, I guess for me is just like the conditioning here is, as an author, an explainer. I'm a professor. I'm a writer. I'm a teacher. That's what I do. And so, part of it's just conditioning to do that. So that's what I'm doing. But another part of it is also, I do think that um, there's maybe a need at the moment that I perceive for this kind of model to help to sort of give people, like I was saying earlier, an upgraded kind of sense of a larger territory. It doesn't mean this model is the best one. It doesn't mean this is the only one. It's just a slightly more capacious model that can kind of like be used in a different way in order to help people orient themselves to where they are, in order to hopefully help people to avoid some of the pitfalls of the spiritual emergencies, and maybe avoid some of the kind of fundamentalist sort of thinking that I think takes place often in spirituality, where people get really fixated on certain positions or certain locations or certain places within the territory. And maybe just offer like a broader menu of options for people to, be able to incorporate into their own practice and think about, where they want to go. So I think there's nothing wrong with, talking about things in ways that are helpful. If they're helpful, hopefully they're helpful. And putting that out there in the world, and we can still do that even if we have dropped the threads. We can still talk about them. So.
And even if there's no meaning or purpose of it, it's the conditioning that's arising here. It's like Zubin likes to talk about this shit. He gets a kick out of it. He's going to do it. And even if one video prior, he's like, you can't say a word about this. Anyone who talks about this is a con artist and needs to, be exiled. It's just that's just how it is. Is there anything you want to say as we wrap up? Because we've got about 3 hours, man. We are badass.
Yeah, this is a marathon.
It's like Rogan level. What you mentioned again, spiritual emergency, spiritual crisis. Is there anything you want to say about that in particular as related to all this?
I think we've talked about the kind of the value of context and being able to sort of have a broader context and how valuable that can be. There is research on spiritual emergency that I've been sort of like following, and that's one of the main takeaways I think from that research is just people having a context for their experiences and not devolving into panic and pathologization, but having options and having information, I think is crucial. So I think we've talked about that. I think we've talked about what the Multidharma model might be able to provide in that respect as well, giving people sort of points of orientation, but also pointing you towards like practice communities, right? Like if you're having some weird Kundalini thing, like, there are communities that work with that. And if you're having some weird, depersonalization thing, there's communities that work with that. And knowing the threads can help you to orient to them. So we talked about that. And then the other thing we talked about was just like not discouraging people from getting help if you need to.
Yeah.
Right. So that might be something that we can, maybe just add some specific recommendations for people. Like if you do, if you do find yourself needing help with a kind of a situation like this, I don't do any spiritual teaching or personalized coaching. I don't know if you do, Zubin. I don't do anything
Not really
like that.
Yeah.
I do have a discussion group for my threads, like people that are interested in kind of thinking about the model and, kind of geeking out about, how it might relate to their experience or whatever. So I do have those discussion groups that are listed on the website. But I don't do any personalized kind of like spiritual advice. I think it's too intimate. It needs too much of like availability that I don't have to do that kind of level of coaching.
Yeah.
So I wanted to recommend maybe the Cheetah House. Cheetah, like the cat, like the animal, Cheetah House, which is a an organization. They have a number of different coaches, therapists of different types. It's mostly peer coaching, peer therapy. People from different traditions. There's another similar organization called Spiritual Emergence Network. And so these two organizations, they have websites, and they have, ways that you can reach out to them if you want some kind of coaching or some assistance with spiritual emergency type stuff. So maybe that's the only thing I would add. Yeah.
That's super helpful. So the Cheetah House and Spiritual Emergency Network, is that what you said?
Network.
Emergence. Okay. I'll find those and put links in the show notes for those so people can have some resources. Because people reach out to me, and there's only so much of me, and I don't do personal stuff, mainly because there's no availability, you're right. And I almost have to sit with someone one-on-one to kind of feel through some of the stuff. And I don't, it's very hard to do that. That's just
it's
me.
Also, for me, it's also like I don't call the plumber for my wife's motorbike.
Exactly.
I have no training whatsoever in therapy or coaching.
Yep. Me neither.
I'm trained as a historian. I trained in languages. I've done plenty of practices, so I have my own experience there. But I don't have the skill or the I don't know the first thing about how to help other people on a one-on-one basis. So
I don't have the malpractice insurance for it, honestly. So there's that. Let's be practical. Yeah. So perfect. So Pierce, this was ridiculous. This was so fantastic. I think people can pull out of this, and I'll put time codes on it so people can jump to the section they're most interested in, the thread they're most interested in. But I recommend people listen to the whole thing and share it with someone who you think is going through something where they don't have a context for it. And this can be so helpful to prevent or recontextualize something before it becomes a spiritual emergency or spiritual crisis that lands people in trouble. And again, it's just so validating for so many people whose experience didn't fit into the typical context of whatever tradition they were started in, or they find themselves in by birth. So super, super helpful. Any last thoughts, Pierce?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think we had plenty of thoughts in the last 3+ hours.
Too many thoughts. Yeah.
Too many. Yeah. But no, I think, I think people should listen to the other presentation, because this one, we very much separated out these 4 threads. And in the other one, we talked about braiding and integration more. And I feel like pointing people who are more advanced along their awakening process, to maybe start with that one, because they'll get the sort of the full sense of the model before going to this
definitely
breakdown. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So we'll link to that. We mentioned it in the beginning, so hopefully people will have that context, because otherwise this will be a little bit odd. And now my usual, hey, if you guys like this content, just simply do a couple things that help get it out to more people. Hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe, turn on your notifications. Those kind of things just help tell these algorithms for these ridiculous companies that this is useful content and people like it. And that way, the people who need to see it will hopefully see it. Of course, nobody needs anything, but it just seems to be a kind of an orchestration in that way. That said, Pierce, a million thanks again for sharing your wisdom with us and with me personally. Like, it's been so helpful. And we'll see you next time when we go dive even deeper into maybe the Psyche Thread, or people can leave in the comments what they want to hear more about too. And thanks again, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Zubin. This was a lot of fun. Time flies when we're jamming together. So
it's crazy, right? Like, and I could probably go another 2 hours, but I think the audience is already like hanging from the rafters. Awesome. Until next time, peace out.
All right, bye.